Hey everybody, welcome to We've Got Worm, a Daily Planet Films podcast series where we expertly dissect and discuss the hit web serial Worm week by week, arc by arc. My name is Matt Freeman, interdimensional space-traveling, all-seeing, all-knowing god entity, and this is my counterpart, Scott Daly. Scott.
Destination.
Agreement.
Trajectory.
Agreement.
Toddler murder?
Concern.
Confident. Yes, Matt, as you said, this is the one and only podcast where you, a worm expert, guide me, a first-time reader, through Wildbow's world of superheroes, supervillains, and everything in between as I inspect, interpret, and yes, even speculate on what the story is and where it is going. This week, we are covering the second half of Arc 26, Sting, which takes place from chapter 26.6 through the end of it. 4 whole chapters. And this is quite an end, Matt. We're kind of moving past the second arc of Worm, and I mean arc in the structural definition, not in the Worm division definition, and moving into that third arc proper. This is the end. This is the transition into that third arc of the story. We're here now, and things are getting crazy.
Yep, we reveal almost all of the mysteries that we had hanging. We put a nice little bow on the Slaughterhouse a lot, aka Slaughterhouse 9000, as some call it, arc.
The wrong people.
Yep, and we're obviously sliding into some kind of conclusion.
Yeah, there's like I can't believe how much there is in these 4 chapters. I think we divided this thing up, and we said, we would do, I think, 6 of the chapters in the first half of this, and we'd do 4 in the second, and that way we would kind of front load the episode, and the first one would be a little longer, and the second one would be not so long. And then we wrote the script for this episode, and somehow it is even longer than the last one. Yeah. Somehow we have more to talk about in these 4 chapters than almost anything else we've done so far.
Yeah, I intentionally sort of made the call that we would put more chapters in the first episode, because I knew that I would want to talk about the last chapter of this arc a huge amount. I don't know if I'm somebody whose favorite anything changes from day to day, but I think this might be my favorite interlude. And I think I've reread it more than any other part of the story. I think I reread it essentially like 4 or 5 times this week in preparation for the podcast, which is not a small feat because it's like 10,000 words or something. Yeah,
it's a long one.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's great. I can't wait to talk about it. I am more nervous to talk about it than I have been anything else we've done so far. It's crazy. It's intimidating. There's so much going on. There's so much to say, and yet it's hard to find a place to start.
Yeah.
But we will get into that in a couple hours when we get to that chapter.
That's right. For now, though, let's talk about some announcements. Just a reminder that the second quarterly fan art contest is ongoing. The theme of Dr. Yamada Saves the World artwork is due on Wednesday, November 22nd by 11:59 p.m. Central Standard Time.
Yeah, and I forgot to put the link to that in last week's show notes, so I'm going to make sure I do that this week. So if you look in the show notes, or if you're on the website or on YouTube or whatever, the link will be there if you want to learn the rules, the prizes, where you send it to, all that stuff. It's all there.
Yes. And I believe Worm, the Glowworm Worm Prelude is wrapping up this week, and Worm 2 will be beginning in earnest very soon. I want to say Saturday, but I'm not 100% sure. That is the day? Okay. Yes,
that is
good.
The day. I've been told that is the day.
Excellent.
Yeah, it's exciting. I have not read a word of it yet, of course, and I can't, and I know people are talking about it. We have a Worm 2 spoilers thread in the Discord chat that I know, and I'm certain is probably hugely active, but I can't, just like the Worm one, I can't go in it, just like the Pact one, just like the Twig one. There's all these threads on our Discord that I can't go in. But
soon, Scott. It's like Xeno's web serial. The closer you get to the end, the more of it is written.
We are really close though. We've got 5 more arcs to go.
Yeah.
And then we're done with Worm.
Yeah.
Wow.
It's going to be weird.
Yeah. All right. Let's move into some listener comments and questions and all that.
So there was one that I pulled out from Regvalas. And it was interesting because this user actually spoiled it because they weren't sure if it was really something that should be talked about yet. And I kind of made the call that I wanted to talk about it. It was just kind of a minor thing, but I really liked it because it wasn't something that I ever got before. There's this almost throwaway beat where Murder Rat nails Gru with the full weight of her body, via her claws falling down the stairs, and he gets up from it and he's just fine. And he makes an offhand remark of like, oh, I should have broken my ribs. And it never really meant anything to me. I always kind of noticed it, but wondered like, oh, what does that mean? And then I just moved on. But Regulus points out that it seems likely that Crawler's power isn't just regeneration, it's regeneration with improvements. And when Gru was spread out all over the freezer, his ribs were splayed open and damaged, and one of the things that he heals is his ribs, and his ribs are presumably not only healed but improved. So that could be why he doesn't break his ribs.
Yeah, what a cool little fun beat. I mean, it's not something that changes the direction of the story. It's not something that really matters in any kind of real sense, but I think it shows the commitment to creating the world and keeping the world firmly planted in reality, although it is an alternate reality from our own. Stuff like that doesn't matter, but it's been thought out and it's in there for you.
Yeah, it's a fun detail. I don't know if I want to call it an Easter egg because I feel like I could have potentially gotten it,
Yeah,
but, yeah.
I don't even really know what Easter egg means anymore.
Yeah, that's a good point. I don't either. Okay, so yeah, let's get to it, Scott. Beat by beat.
We got a lot to do, so we're gonna have to move on.
Yeah,
right into that beat by beat.
That's right. 26.6, and we are picking up from the point where Weaver and her motley crew of the 9 to 11 or so samurai are flying in to Ellisburg on the Pendragon ship. The strike force consists of a number of heroes and villains that we know well, and Weaver is focusing meditatively on her bugs as the ship enters the city and is gradually onset by monsters.
Yeah, and this is cool. We start like immediately where we left off, and we've got, like you said, our 7, 9, 10, like 13 if you count the dog samurai, like flying directly into the lion's den. And I do like this beat. That we take time, like Weaver talks about how she's dealing with it, and she notices that Rachel's dealing with it the same way by kind of retreating into their power. But we also take the time to circle around to each one of our characters, and we see how they're handling things. We see how Chevalier and Defiant are talking to each other in low voices. They're planning and strategizing, and it made me wonder, it's like, do you think Defiant's let Chevalier know about Dragon yet? Maybe not. But we see Revel sitting there meditating. We see Tecton and Hoyden just chatting up, and Perry and Foil kind of affectionately embracing each other. We're going around the room, and we're seeing how all these people are dealing with the stress, and we're establishing here that Taylor feels pretty alone. Everyone else is kind of paired off or has their thing, and Taylor isn't. And interesting to me is that, like, she doesn't see Golem here. She doesn't point out Golem in any way. I don't know what that means or what that says, but it just jumped out at me.
Yeah, that is interesting. But you're pointing out that this is a good calm before the storm moment, which is important to get at this point. This is something Worm does very well consistently, is it grounds you in the characters before it throws you into another chaotic battle thing, because if it didn't do that, you just wouldn't care. But right. It consistently does a great job at that. I almost wonder if she knows Golem so well that she doesn't even feel the need to check in on him.
Yeah, maybe. You're absolutely right. That could be it.
Yeah. So Weaver does chat with Rachel, though, trying to reopen the connection between them. Rachel admits that she's worried about her dogs back on Earth Gimel.
Yeah, and this is such a really wonderful little beat. It's more of that calm before the storm stuff, and it shows, once again, that deep bond between Rachel and Taylor, that it's still here. It's still here, even after the years that have gone by, it's still there. And I think it's really easy to read this as Taylor seeing that Rachel is nervous, seeing that Rachel is fidgeting, and trying to calm her down by distracting her and connecting with her. That's absolutely true. That is part of what she's doing. Taylor even kind of says as much. But if you look back at the other scenes and how Taylor like finishes her descriptions of each of the other members of the team, like she always finishes with, I didn't want to disturb her, or I didn't want to interject, or Perry and Foil, like there's still some unwritten like tension there because she kind of pushed her down that path. And then Defiant is busy, like he's not taking his eyes off the control. Everyone's busy, everyone has their thing, and she's alone. So she isn't just reaching out to Rachel for Rachel. She's looking for her own kind of distraction. She's looking for someone to talk to. She's looking for a connection to make, and Rachel's the only person she can find it with.
Yeah, and I think we might actually be calling back to this moment at the beginning of the next chapter when Golem is emotionally distraught and finding himself unable to even contemplate reaching out to any of the people around him for help. Is this basic idea of this isolation between capes and the masks sort of serving as a barrier between them.
Yeah, I think you're right. Absolutely.
Yeah. So she experiences a flashback to sounds that have haunted her in the past, like Gru's gasping in the freezer, her father's shouting as she kills Tag in front of him. This is triggered by her hearing the monsters damage the metal of the ship.
Yeah. I like this a lot because we talk about setups a lot on this show. We do, because this story is like riddled with really clever, well done setups, and there are tangible setups where we're literally establishing something so we can use it later. But there's also some kind of more abstract setups, and I think that's what this falls into, because at the end of this chapter, Taylor is going to do a thing that is a next step in a certain path that she's been on for a while now. And here we're kind of laying the groundwork for those decisions in a very abstract kind of way. We're showing how haunted she is by the things in her past still, not just her choices, because it's not just the choices that she takes, but also the places where she perceives she's failed. With Brian, she felt that she failed him and failed to protect him, and that's the situation he is. She remembers the sound that the doctor that's killed by a mannequin makes when she hits the ground. These are moments where Taylor feels like either she's made a poor choice and it's haunting her, or a moment where she's failed, and that's kind of setting her up as being this person who, yes, has grown a lot since we've last seen her, but is still driven by this central trauma and this need that will lead her into some choices.
Yeah, and I think the primary way, when we talked about this last time, in which she has grown is that she's become even more hyper-focused on the mission, more of a soldier, and this is a culmination of that change. So the ship lands, and a number of monsters are trying to batter their way in. The team needs to protect the decoder, which is hacking its way into the portal that Jack used to leave the city. Weaver relays her perspective on the battlefield to her cohort and uses bugs to dig at the weak points on the monsters. The heroes form ranks at the ramp entry to the ship and battle the creatures as they attack.
Yeah, this is all great. There's a reason that this protect the thing, buy us time trope is so often used in both like stories and games and things like that. And I think it's because it works. It establishes stakes and tension almost instantly, and you can position your characters to be in this no-win situation without really having to worry about figuring out how to pull them out of that no-win situation, because you don't have to beat the thing. You don't have to win. You just have to survive. It's fun. It's interesting. It's always good to see. And I like it. I like it a lot.
Yeah. And I also want to say that from this point until the end of this arc, I view as a masterclass in ratcheting up tension, which is something I've probably said like 3 times in the course of this podcast that this arc is a masterclass in ratcheting up tension. But this is the penultimate of that, because you're essentially putting them in this terrible situation where these monstrous fantasy creatures are attacking their ship, and they quote unquote escape from that into, a tohu bohu nightmare city, surrounded by the Nine. So it just goes up and up and up.
Yeah. You're right.
I like this moment where Rachel and Golem can't go all out with their powers because both of their powers generate mass from nothing, which makes the ship heavier, which is counter to what they want to accomplish.
Yeah. I think not only does that show the novel's like continued adherence to real world limitations of powers, for like we still live in a world with physics, and even if we're breaking it in some ways, it's going to have consequences in others. But I think it also shows that our characters still kind of have a level of hope, even as the things mount and it becomes more hopeless. They're still kind of thinking about that return journey or that escape. It's kind of like when in Lord of the Rings, when Sam casually mentions that if they keep their rations the way they are, that they'll still have enough for the journey home. It's like this moment where like we're still thinking about that future, and they kind of know on some level it's a suicide mission, but they don't on some other levels.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. So the creatures keep digging and melting their way into the ship. Things get desperate enough that Weaver has to stand side by side with Defiant, knife in hand, and thinks to herself, "Who knew we'd get to this point, Armsmaster?"
Yes, I love this moment so much. Like I would have never seen this coming. Like the transformation not only these characters have individually had, but collectively had throughout the course of this book is fascinating. And I think if a time comes where I do go back and reread this story from the beginning, I think that's one thing I'm going to be paying extra attention to that. And I think like it's so crazy that we've gotten here, like, and almost to confirm how alike these characters are now, how together these characters are, how in sync these characters are. They're talking about the fact that the portal itself isn't a guarantee, that it might not work, and like people are shocked at that. Like, this isn't a guarantee. This might not actually work. And Taylor thinks nothing's a guarantee. And immediately after that, Defiant says, "I never guarantee anything." And then, of course, to complete this whole wonderful beat, Defiant follows that up with, "Except for a select few promises I make to people I love and people I hate." And that's awesome.
Yeah.
So Defiant is in this moment, like, not only is he connected to Weaver in this way that we can see here, but this also serves as like a hint into his psyche, because he's really fucked up. He's really angry. He's really heartbroken, and he can't stop thinking about Dragon, the people he loves, and Saint, the people he hates. And this is not the first time in this chapter we get this hint into his state of mind. There's this moment earlier where Tecton is observing how long it's going to take for the portal gun to go through, and he says 4 minutes, and Defiant replies, "I think so." And it's just like, oh my God, it's heartbreaking, but it's a great subtle window into how he's doing without having to explicitly state it.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, all of this is wonderful, and I think at this point, now that we're approaching the end, you can probably appreciate why me and a lot of listeners were excited to hear your take on, for example, Armsmaster when he's first introduced, because at the time, you know, mentally where you are now, you kind of want to remember what it felt like to not understand this character and to not see that he had this in him. Because it's such a fun journey. You want to remember what that journey was like.
I know. I compared him to the Tick type character when I first met him, and I mean that was partially just a wrong read, but also partially he just came off kind of weird at first, and like overly confident, like over chest puffy type guy, and he's just this complicated different person now. Yeah. And it's amazing. It's like the moments like this make you really realize that how much change he's undergone.
Yeah. I think it's very safe to say that he's one of my favorite characters in the story.
Yeah.
So at this point, Defiant calls Saint and asks for support from the Azazels, but Saint appears to refuse.
Yeah. And I think this connects into everything that we've been doing with him, with this idea of how a mess Defiant is right now, because he's suffering with the loss of Dragon, his hatred of Saint, and how desperate must he be in this moment to go to Saint and ask for help? How hard would that be for Defiant to do? Would Armsmaster have done that? Would Armsmaster have been able to swallow his pride and go to the person that he can't stand and that he hates to ask for help? I don't think so. And I think we connect it into that maybe this is part of the promises that he made to Dragon, the promises that he guarantees he's gonna gonna keep up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So he ends up using the force field that they have on board to buy them some more time, and he asks Dinah to help pare down the options, and she does. So he makes some choices based on what she tells him, and then they make their way through the portal.
Yep, and we literally get a moment of tension release as they're huddling around each other, about to finally be overcome. And yes, they're alive. They made it through. And then you're like, oh wait, no, it's worse.
Yeah,
it's worse.
Yeah,
so it's always getting worse.
So in this new place they're in, I believe it's a pocket dimension, right?
Yeah, I think it's the same place. That was the same place where Bonesaw hung out, right?
Yeah, I'm never entirely sure. I think you're probably right. I wasn't 100% on that, but I think you're probably right. So Jack starts talking to them using Screamer's power. He says offhandedly that Grey Boy is retrieving Aster, which freaks out everyone, mainly Theo. Inside the pocket dimension, they find some more clones in vats, basically another trolley problem distraction put there by Jack. Do they kill the clones or just continue on? And Defiant mentions that they can just collapse the dimension.
Yeah, isn't this interesting? So again, like I'm not going to get into the thing that happens at the end of this chapter just yet. But again, we get in a situation where there are seemingly two options. Do you stay and deal with the clones, or do you chase after Jack? And Defiant is in the middle of this trolley problem. Defiant kind of comes in and says, "No, there's a third option.
Right.
It's just right. We can just do this thing." And I think it's interesting that in this moment where we have our character have to make this trolley problem-esque choice at the end of this chapter, that we've established earlier in the that same chapter, that sometimes there's a third option that you just haven't thought of yet or hasn't presented itself yet. Not saying that that's specifically trying to say anything about about the decision that Taylor makes at the end of this one, but I think that's interesting. Like, Jack intentionally sets up these choices to where it seems like you have to choose between two things, but he's really just playing with you, and that's interesting.
Yeah, I myself think that happens more often in real life than true trolley problems. Usually in real life, you can come up with some kind of clever solution to a problem, that clever third option. Yeah,
well, because, I mean, the truth of this is, and I think we're going to get into this a little later, but the truth of this is that the trolley problem is a thought experiment. It is not something that really exists in any kind of real world scenario.
Yeah.
It's used to discuss how to go through morality and these ethical quandaries, but it's not real.
Yeah. So at this point, Jack starts piping the video from Grey Boy onto the monitors that are in the area, and Weaver recalls that the thing hiding under the tarp back in Killington, the thing that she couldn't even think about, was a Grey Boy victim.
Hey, Matt, remember when I said I can't imagine what could be so bad that Taylor would not only lie about it to her team, but refuse to even think about it to herself?
Yep.
Well, now I know.
Yay.
I know now, and it's awful.
Yeah. So and this is, we're coming to understand Grey Boy's power in little tiny bits, and we kind of don't want to. But here we go. So Grey Boy is torturing the two PRT officers who are with Purity and the other former Empire 88 villains.
Just call them the Nazis.
What?
Call them the Nazis.
They're the Nazis. Yes, the Nazis. And we gradually come to understand that, we come to understand the nature of his power. So we don't see it, but we're hearing what he's doing, and we're having to piece it together. While the heroes are simultaneously scouting the pocket dimension complex. So we're getting stuff from Grey Boy, and then we're getting Weaver scouting the complex, and then stuff from Grey Boy again, and then more in the complex looking for Jack.
Yeah.
And it's extremely tense and creepy and unsettling.
Yeah, and my favorite part of all of this is this moment that makes me officially declare Theo as my favorite character in the book right now. Because there's this moment where Revel says, "Best not to watch," her voice gentle. "It's not worth it." And what does Theo do in response to that? He didn't take his eyes off the screen. And everybody else looks away. Even Taylor goes on to scout the area to do the mission. But Theo can't. He has to watch. He has to see it. He is that person who speaks for the dead. He is that person who has to feel these things. And therefore, he has to look at them. He can't look away. Like, everything that happens in the rest of this chapter is horrible. What Grey Boy does is horrific. One of the worst things we've seen so far. The choice that Taylor feels that she's absolutely forced to make is terrible and depressing and awful. But in this moment, I loved Theo more than ever. I loved him. He doesn't take his eyes off that screen. He can't ignore what's happening. And there's strength in that. There's something in there that I just love so much.
Yeah, I think I've actually come to appreciate that more since I first read this book, because I think when I first read it, I was in a frame of mind where I would have said, no, don't subject yourself to that. You don't need that in your head. Now I've come around to a greater appreciation for the idea that you just because you're not looking into the darkness of humanity and the bad things that happen in the world doesn't mean that you're actually sparing yourself anything. You have to understand what actually exists in order to appreciate the good things in life. And that's not really why Theo is doing it. Theo is doing it to honor those people and those things. But I still think it's very valid. And like you said, it's honorable.
Yeah. Yeah.
So some of the clones take Aster, which basically Grey Boy sort of snags Purity because she tries to throw Aster out the window. He tortures one of the PRT officers for information about what's going on. The officer tells them all the important information about the expected catalyzing event. Grey Boy decides that he doesn't like the story, so he tortures the uniform anyway.
I honestly don't know how something can be so horrible in so many different ways. So at the same time, you're like, oh shit, Jack just like got information on how exactly he's going to end the world. Fuck. Also, these poor people are being horribly, brutally tortured. Even poor Crusader, which I spent a whole interlude talking about how much I fucking hate and didn't want to humanize him at all. It's like, oh fuck, he doesn't deserve that. Jesus.
Yeah, I always thought that was really interesting, and I was remembering that during his interlude, because there's kind of two ways of doing this. There's the Bonesaw thing where you say, oh, you'll never make me empathize with this character. And then Wild Dog makes us sympathize with the character. And then there's the side of, you know what, no punishment is too harsh for this asshole. Oh, yeah? Well, how about if we torture him for billions of years?
Oh, my God. Yeah.
And then you kind of are like, okay, I don't know, okay, we'll see.
Yeah.
Yeah. By this point, I think we do understand what Grey Boy's power is, which is that I think everyone knows, but he loops people in time, and then he injures them in a way where they're going to feel the injury over and over and over forever, essentially. So Jack, having heard this information from the PRT officer about the catalyzing event and what that means for him, he's musing about what he should do, how that should affect his strategy. Meanwhile, Weaver tracks him down in a chamber along with about 200 of the 9.
And here we go.
Yeah.
Here we go, Matt.
And she thinks, 2 years of emotions caught up with me in a single instant. I felt fear grip me, anxiety seizing my entire body, adrenaline flooding through my body.
Yeah, and I think this line right here is absolutely key to understanding Taylor's mental process at this point. This is everything that she's been preparing for up until now. Every sacrifice she's made, every bad thing she's done, every choice that she's made has been leading to this moment, has been for the sake of this moment, this one chance to stop the man who will end the world. This is everything to her, so she has to act. Inaction for her is not understand, like, she can't process that at this point. This is what she's been doing everything for. So inaction is not on the menu. She can't do it. Yeah.
She's usually so detached in fights, but this one is so important. And like you said, it's been building up for so long that it hits her with this emotional reaction.
Yeah.
And she says, like you said, she can't not act. I have to try, I said, echoing Purity's words from the video. Such sad, small words, Jack commented. You don't have to. I had tricks prepared, but none of them were remotely viable, not with Bonesaw so close. And I add that line about Bonesaw because it's wonderful dramatic irony that who knows what Bonesaw would do, you know?
Yeah, I mean, if Bonesaw... if she had just killed Jack in this moment, I don't think Bonesaw would have brought him back. But of course she doesn't know that. So she can't enter that into her toolbox. That's not part of her equation.
Right.
And it's like, you're almost like screaming at the screen at that point. It's like, no, just kill him. Trust me. She won't bring it back. She won't do it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's great.
And I love, like, she echoes Purity's words here. And Purity, like, is talking about, like, how she just basically tried to throw her daughter out the window. She had to try. She had to try to give her mercy. And Taylor's echoing her here, and we don't fully understand how close she's echoing her until the end. It just sounds like, no, I have to try. I have to do something. But it also, very literally, she has to try to do the exact same thing that Purity just did. Yeah,
no, you're right. That's a connection that it took me a while to make, but she finishes what Purity tried to do, basically.
Yeah.
So Jack says he thinks he can take her, and he offers her a fight. Somebody steps through the door near her, and she immediately shoots them in the head. And she thinks, a life taken, a hostage killed, but I couldn't afford to take any chances. Which is still like a important thought for us to register, even though she realizes that it was actually a nice guy.
Yeah, I think the interesting thing about this is because of the Aster killing that happens in a few paragraphs, this almost kind of gets passed over. And I think that is a level of difference in action than this is. But yeah, she does kill someone here and thinks that they were a hostage. In the moment, she thinks that they were a hostage, and she decides that that's worth the risk, that it's worth taking that chance. If this had been a real hostage, Taylor would have shot him and killed him.
Yeah.
And so she's in this mindset now where she's completely willing to take out innocents to ensure that victory is achieved, that Jack is stopped, that the world ending is prevented. Because she can't afford to take those chances. So again, we're kind of like, it doesn't, I don't think it registers at the time, but we are kind of subtly laying the groundwork for the killing of Aster that's to come. It's all here. It's just kind of hidden.
Right. It demonstrates to us implicitly that she's willing to pay that cost, especially if you contrast it to back when she first fought Mannequin. There's no way she would have done something like that. Or if she had accidentally shot an innocent, she would have felt absolutely horrible about it, and it would have completely derailed her. Now she immediately is like, yeah, that sucks. But I had to. Moving on.
Yeah. Especially since we just saw her remember the sound that the innocent that died at the hands of Mannequin when she failed to protect them, quote unquote, failed to protect them. It's not really her fault, but she blames herself for that. That's still in her mind. She's still thinking about those kind of things. So yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right there.
Yeah, I guess I even want to slightly amend what I just said, which is that it's not that it doesn't affect her, it's that she's compartmentalized away the part of her that it affects so that she can function.
Yeah.
And that's equally bad, I think, in its own way.
Yeah.
We get this thing where as the other heroes arrive outside, or nearby at least, Weaver steps into view and opens fire. She then lets us know the reason that she's a crack shot, which is that her power, the sensory aspect of her power, gives her a sense of the relative positions of objects, so she can usually hit what she's aiming at.
I think we talked about this back when she first did that. The first time she fired a gun, she hit Mannequin perfectly.
Yeah.
And we were kind of like, that's like kind of tropish that the person who picks up the gun first just happens to be awesome with it. But now we explain it away here and it's not just a beat to explain away something. It makes sense within the world. It's something that a part of Taylor's power that she wasn't fully aware of at the time, but she has grown to understand it now. I like it.
Yeah. What's funny was that I distinctly remember in that episode, I did not remember that this explanation happens later in the story. And I was like, maybe it has something to do with the fact that she senses where things are with her power. And you were like, yeah, maybe.
See, I just thought you were being coy.
I wasn't being coy. I forgot that this is the explanation, in fact. So yeah. And then of course, here's the text. Here's the text, Scott. I'm going to read it. My bullet took Cherish in the head. Another bullet struck Screamer. I hesitated. Then I shot Aster, who was held in Hatchetface's arms. Manton, no, too dangerous. Greyboy was moving, trying to get to a better vantage point. I turned, activating my flight pack for a boost of speed. The Siberian broke away from Jack, giving chase. Crawlers advanced only a pace behind. In that same moment, I drew out more lines, giving the signal. Revel and Foil both opened fire, their energy orbs and bolts tearing through the walls and into the rank and file of the Slaughterhouse 9.
So there it is.
Yeah.
So let's talk about this for a minute.
Yeah.
And here's what I don't want to do. I do not want to moralize. I don't want to have a moral debate about this decision. I've already done that on Twitter a bunch. I'm not interested in doing that. Like, you can think that this was morally right, and you can think this is morally wrong. And there is evidence in the text here that supports the way you feel either way. But what I do want to talk about is I want to talk about how Wildbow structures this event, how he doles it out to us, and what that choice means, what it means for Taylor in the moment, what it means for her mindset in that moment, and what it means for who and what she is going to become going forward. Because, you know, regardless of if you think this is justified or not, if this is rational, if this is a rational, justified, morally correct decision or not, is immaterial. The point is that Taylor has just killed a toddler, a child, a innocent child. And that is going to have a profound effect on her as a human being. How could it not? How could it not? Even if she tries to compartmentalize it away, is this the point finally where those compartments cannot hold back anymore? They are not sufficient enough, because this is a huge, huge thing.
Yeah. You have to wonder, is it just another step down that slippery slope where it leads essentially into a bottomless pit? Or is this a moment where she really has to take stock and consider what she's been willing to sacrifice to get to this point?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And this comes after a 2-year time jump. This comes after Taylor has spent so much time growing and changing and you know, learning to deal with things, learning who she is, learning to reach out to Jessica when she has these issues. And in this moment, like, we see her kind of become the person we've seen the entire time, that her ability to look past these things, her ability to be the one to make the choices, even if you accept the rationalization and the justification that the story gives, which again I think is okay to do, you have to see that she is in a place where she's able to make that decision, and she is able to make that decision very quickly. And I know it says that she hesitated. She did hesitate, but it is microseconds. It is turning a corner, shooting, pause, fire.
Yeah.
This is the thing that is so interesting about how this is written is a lot of times with Taylor, we've seen her have to work through that internal justification, to monologue internally that justification that she needs to make in order to act. She has to do it. And we don't see that here. She hesitates. And remember, we're in her head. We are her. And we don't see her think about these things. We don't see her work through it in her head. We don't see her say, well, this is actually like preferable to what happened. Purity was going to do the same thing. This will save her billions of years of torture. We don't see her process that.
Yeah.
So did she? I mean, like, did she really process through all that in a way, or did she just act and then deal with the processing of that later?
Yeah, I feel like the latter. And when we were talking about this earlier, I compared it to the sort of flinch reaction you have when you realize that you need to exit the freeway right now, but you're one lane over and you have to decide if you're going to swerve across a lane of traffic and put everyone in danger, or if you're just going to miss the exit. And usually that decision is made by some mental process which is not quite conscious, and that's the kind of hesitation that I assessed this as being.
Right.
We talked a lot about this today, actually, and we talked a lot about the language of it, and I wanted to talk a bit about that now. So one thing that I didn't notice before that I'm noticing right now, actually, is that it says, "My bullet took Cherish in the head, another bullet struck Screamer." So the agents in those sentences are the bullets, right? The bullet killed Cherish. A bullet killed Screamer. I hesitated. Then I shot Aster. Now, Taylor is the agent in that sentence.
Yeah.
But it's then I shot Aster, who was held in Hatchetface's arms. And we both agreed that that sentence was really interesting because your eyes almost just fly over, and then I shot Aster onto the second clause of the sentence, and you have to say, wait, what? And then I bet everyone who reads this story rereads that sentence because of how it's structured, and I think that's whether or not it's intentional. I suspect it is intentional, but it's a fantastic technique of getting you to do a double take just by how you structured a sentence.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right, and we talked about how rushing to the second clause of that sentence like almost forces you to move on. Mm-hmm. Like there's a like, what does who was held in Hatchetface's arms? What does that information really do for us in that moment? How does that clarify anything for us? Does that matter? Does who was holding Aster in that second matter? Or is it just we're moving on to the next thing right away? How different would this be if it just ended at, then I shot Aster? How different would that sentence have read? How much would it have landed? And I had several people, I think yourself included, say that the first time they read this, they almost missed that Aster was shot.
Yeah.
That they like had to go, that like you said, they had to go back and reread, and some of them said they didn't even confirm it until she says to Golem later in the section that Aster's dead. Mm-hmm. And because it just happens so fast. We have a series of one-line paragraphs here. It just goes so fast, and it moves on to the next thing immediately. It's like, then I shot Aster, who was held in Hatchetface's arms. Then we move on to Manton immediately. Then no, too dangerous. We move on. Flight pack. Now we're on to Siberia. Now we're on to the next thing. There's no stop. There's no slowdown of the prose at all. It's just next thing. Move on. And it can't not be designed that way. You make those choices intentionally. You write the thing intentionally that way.
Yeah, no, I agree completely. I've said everything I want to say about this part for now.
I have as well.
Very well structured, and you're right that I find the way it's written and what it says about the character more interesting than the actual moral debate. So yeah, let's move on.
Yeah.
So Jack divides the group of 209 members rather, into different parties and sends them to different locations, even as the heroes blast through them and kill droves of them. Weaver runs out of that area. I collapsed on my hands and knees as I reached the bottom of the staircase. The others that had managed to reach our location stood over me. "They're gone," I said, panting not from exertion, but the sheer panic of what I'd done. And she tells Theo that Aster is dead, and he starts to ask if she did it, but he stops himself. "It's for the best," he said, but he doesn't sound like he believes it.
What a great moment, right? We see her physically reacting to what she did, almost as if she can't really even believe it. And it makes you start to wonder, how much of this, as you said, was her conscious thought process, and how much of this was her passenger taking over for her in this moment? How much losing control once again and acting on instinct, acting out of her conscious thought. And it's devastating. And the best part about this whole thing is, instead of staying with her, instead of getting to see the outcome of this decision from her perspective, we end this chapter and we tear away from her. We rip ourselves out of her perspective and we move into someone else's.
Yeah, I think that's fantastic, because we desperately want to know, how is Taylor going to deal with this? Oh, nope. Now we're in Theo's head.
Yep.
Theo wanders around the space that the Nine have just vacated in his interlude, 26A, trying not to look too hard at the bodies, trying not to break down in front of everyone. It's good to be in Theo's head. He's really not like Taylor. He's not able to shrug off or compartmentalize away the horror and the loss that he sees. He feels all of it, and he has to exert willpower not to cry. He thinks about how the different heroes present would react if he did cry.
Yeah, this is such a great opening. I love Theo so much. And this is, I think, where I want to dive into that decision to cut away from Taylor a little bit more. Like I said, she has just done this terrible thing. She has killed an innocent. She's killed a child. And even if it's justified or not, she still did it. That doesn't change the fact that it happened. And we see that she's panicking, physically hyperventilating. And then we cut away from it to Theo. Theo, this person who is the one that suffers most from the choice that Taylor makes. Not just because Aster was his family, but because he's also the person that can't compartmentalize, that has to deal with death, that has to deal with the consequences of people's actions. So cutting to, not only is cutting away from Taylor in this moment perfect, but cutting to Theo is perfect. And on top of all that, it allows us to observe Taylor's reaction from afar, from that third party type perspective. We're out of her mind and we're away from her tendency to justify and compartmentalize and kind of switch into that almost unreliable narrator thing where we're like so in tune with her thought process that we tend to get ourselves into a place where we agree with it and believe it. And so now we get to observe her reaction from someone else, from someone who can't do the things that Taylor does.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And what her reaction is that she's just kind of sitting there, just looking over the bodies. And Theo is observing her, and he's trying to guess what she's thinking. He's thinking she would be assessing who was dead, who wasn't, planning and adjusting her expectations for the coming fight, quite possibly. Probably. In the midst of that was Weaver thinking about Aster, the fact that she, either by aiming a gun and pulling the trigger, or by giving the order to Revel and Foyle, had killed the toddler. Weaver was a hard person to deal with. Taylor, not so much.
So, it's been a long time since we being the story, has treated Taylor and Weaver, Skitter, as distinct individuals. Taylor really hasn't been doing it since she was first exposed. Since her identity came out, she just kind of transitioned to a place where she is Weaver. Weaver is her. Taylor, Weaver, same thing. But we're in Golem's eyes now. And so we kind of see it. We see that he still views these people separately. And he views there's part of Taylor that is easier to get along to. But the Weaver part is that part that we've been talking about, how much of a pain in the ass it must be to work or be around this person. He views these people, these identities, as separate. And he does the same thing to himself as well. We'll see that in a minute. But I'm curious how spot on do you think Golem kind of is in this moment? Because I do agree with him that she's absolutely like scanning and assessing who is dead and who isn't, and counting the numbers and figuring out who is left. I also think that on level she is thinking about Aster in a certain way. Processing it, justifying, working through her reasons.
Yeah, I think she spends at least part of the time that she's just sitting here listlessly thinking about Aster, because as we're about to see, Rachel reacts to the way she's sitting. And I think if she were just sitting there thinking about strategy, Rachel wouldn't have reacted to that.
Yeah.
And it's possible that all she's doing is she's trying desperately to cram Aster into a compartment, but at least it takes her a little while to accomplish that. And then after she's accomplished that, she does return to being all business.
Yeah, you're right.
So Theo lets himself think about Caden and even the worst ones, Crusader and even Night and Fog, who we kind of don't even see as people. But to him, they were a kind of family.
Yeah, and here's the part of the preparation where I just literally copy-pasted like an entire page worth of things that Theo has said, because Theo basically is working through and processing through all of this stuff right now, and it's all brilliant and wonderful. And I told myself when I copy pasted this all in, I was not going to read it all verbatim, but there are definitely parts of it I want to hit on. There's one part in specifically that I want to hit on because I think it's really important to kind of a lot of the themes of these two Theo chapters.
Okay, go for it.
So the one I wanted to hit on specifically is that exactly that, when he's thinking about his family with these Nazis, these people that he finds disgusting individuals, but he says there had been gentle moments, like the time they'd been watching television one morning, and Acape had talked about how Tinkers were their least favorite type of opponent to fight, and he and Caden had laughed because Caden and her group had run into Leet just a week before. Stupid things in the end. Nonsensical. But stupid, nonsensical things were sometimes the most important. And it's this, like, this maturity from Theo we see here that like, yes, these were terrible people, but he had some kind of bond, some kind of connection to them, and sometimes these small insignificant things that you would never think about are the parts that really end up mattering to you. And I think that's so kind of beyond his years. I think that's great.
Yeah, I wonder if that's something that Taylor understands.
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, not sure that she does.
I think Taylor's so big picture, you know, and like goal oriented that it has to be the end thing. That I don't think it is. I don't think she could understand that. I don't think that she would fully get what he means here.
Yeah, I think that she used to value the small moments with the Undersiders, and in fact, that's why she still feels this great attachment to the Undersiders, while she feels no attachment to the Chicago Wards, because they shared all those small, stupid, nonsensical things with each other. But now she doesn't allow herself that luxury anymore.
No.
So, and in her head, she would say that she can't afford to.
Yeah.
Perhaps Theo, perhaps I would say you can't afford not to. That's your humanity.
Yeah. And so one of the other parts is when he's talking about the people he's lost, and he says he's lost them to violence and stupidity and madness, and he could see the allure in how the others seemed to be functioning, bottling all it inside. He could see the twisted logic of it, even as if there was a binary to everything. Every enemy was somehow a twisted mess of emotion, layered by a seeming calmness, while every ally seemed to be cold inside, with only an act on the surface. He looked down at his mask, a metal face with lenses over the eyes, stoic, expression neutral, or a little stern. He'd chosen it at first because his real face was a little too round for a mask, but the PR teams had wanted to get more faces on the team. He'd compromised and hadn't given his mask much thought beyond that. So we have this moment where he's trying to understand people, and he's trying to understand, and he sees why a Taylor-like reaction to the things that happen is preferable. How this constant masking of emotions is a preferable thing to get you through the day. And then he relates that to himself. We have to go back once again to this idea of the importance of names and the importance of costumes in this story, and how it's more than just a thing you have to wear. It's your identity. It's how you display yourself. And Theo looks down at this mask that like projects all the things that he, while understands the meaning of, has trouble doing, and he kind of regrets it a little bit. Like he says, I don't know if this is the image I really want to put forward. This cold, unflinching person. I don't know if this is who I want to be.
Right. While Taylor is sitting there trying to fit her metaphorical mask back in place so that she can function, Theo is doing the opposite thing. He's saying, I reject this idea that this is how I should be. Yeah. And to almost kind of confirm that in this really wonderful way to cap off my long list of things I copy and pasted,
like he's thinking about what happens next. Like he's thinking he could make it through this, save the world. They could find the source of the Endbringers and defeat them, could clean things up, get things in order and stop all the real monsters. He could go to college, get a career, and find a girl and marry her. And at the end of the day, Justin would still be screaming. Aster would still be dead. The ugly decisions would have been made. And it's this beat that we've seen throughout the story so far. This idea that even if you do good things, even if you save the world, even if you do right things, it doesn't erase the bad things that you've done. Taylor specifically said this when she was contemplating Regent, that he at the end of his days, he did the right thing, and that doesn't stop the bad things from being there. They still exist. So this idea that if you sacrifice things for the right reasons, if you make choices that end in badness but overall goodness, that's true, but the badness is still there, and you still have to live with it. So Taylor killed Aster, and maybe that was the morally right decision at the time. Maybe she saved her billions of years of torture and torment and horribleness. But at the end of the day, she still killed Aster. And that's something that Theo knows. Like Taylor is all about the mission, and Theo is kind of all about the after. And I love that dichotomy. I love it so much.
Yeah, it's what we really need right here. We really need that exactly right at this point in the story, I think. Yeah, I was joking earlier about like making one of those trolley problem memes, except the trolley problem meme is just the first panel, and then every subsequent panel of like the cartoon is the guy who pulls the lever trying to go about living his life and being destroyed by the remorse of what he's done.
Yeah.
Even though he made the quote unquote correct utilitarian decision, he keeps thinking about the person who he's responsible for killing, you know? That's reality. That's how people really deal with these things.
Absolutely.
You know? Yeah. And you do live most of your life in the after. It's not just the decision that you made in that moment.
Right. Yeah.
So like we mentioned, Rachel can tell something is off with Theo and Weaver, and he asks Theo what's up. She asks Theo what's up. And he explains, that he's kind of messed up by all this. He's kind of trying to hold it together. And she doesn't really seem to buy it. She doesn't really get it, but she gives him and Weaver each a therapy dog. And it's so great because she seems so like gruff and angry as always, but like now we understand her and we know that like she leaves the dog with him, and he doesn't really understand. He doesn't understand why she's done it. And he starts petting and scratching the dog. And it helped, oddly enough, having contact with another living creature without all the issues and hassles of dealing with people. No judgment, no worries, just being alone without being alone. And like in his mind, this is an accident, but obviously Rachel completely did this on purpose.
Yeah. And it's so funny because like we've seen Rachel through Taylor's point of view so often that we forget like Taylor it does not point out the gruffness and the coldness as much because Taylor understands her so much that she kind of just processes through it and doesn't even consciously think about it. But we haven't seen her from other people's point of view and how gruff and just naturally annoying that she can seem to people. Like Theo just wants her to leave. She's bugging him. He's just like, go away. I don't want to talk about Weaver. I don't want to talk about this. Go away. And because he doesn't understand her. He doesn't get her. But yeah, like this moment is so wonderful. The dog helps him. I love Rachel.
Yeah. I think it's one of the more redeeming qualities of Taylor as a character that she has gone out of her way to make this connection and retain this connection with Rachel, because we talk a lot about how she's sort of drawn as an unlikable protagonist in a lot of ways, and a lot of other characters don't like her, but this aspect of her humanity and her caring nature shines through and really buys back a lot of credit with us, I think.
Yeah, and I think it like we talked about this before, but how different this story would have been if we weren't in her point of view. And I wonder how much less we would have liked Taylor as a character if we didn't get to see things, from her perspective, didn't get to understand that sometimes when she's annoying, when she's direct, she's doing it from this deep-seated core of wanting to do the right thing, wanting to be that hero, genuinely caring about people. It's another example of why that first-person point of view works so well in this story.
Yeah, absolutely. So now it's go time. So Theo puts on his mask and he becomes Golem.
And it's such a good moment. Like he says Golem again, the Golem now. And it ties back to his examination of that mask earlier. That Golem, that this persona is a symbol of that stoic, expressionless, neutral cape that Theo has such a hard time being. And he doesn't want to become this person. He doesn't think he's really capable of it, but he's also a hero. He's been gifted with this power and this ability to make real change. So he's gonna do it. He's gonna don that mask and become Golem. But he doesn't identify as Golem. He's Theo and he's donning this persona to do things. Like I think that if Jessica Yamada were to sit him down and ask him what his name was, I don't think he would say Golem. I think he would say his name is Theo.
Mm-hmm. I agree. Yeah. So they argue about where to go. Turns out that Jack, with the remaining Siberian, Grey Boy, Hookwolf, and all 8 Harbingers, along with some Psychosomas and Nixes, went to an area of Los Angeles that Tohu and Bohu turned into a mess of traps. The other members of the 9, the other heroes want to follow the other groups of the 9, to their own cities where they've all gone separately. But Weaver persuades them that they need to bring the full brunt of their forces against Jack. Once we leave, Defiant said, we break the configuration cell and everything here breaks down on a Euclidean level. There's no going back, changing our mind. I get that, Weaver said, but 2 or 3 of us aren't going to do anything special. We need big guns. Golem closed his eyes. There she is, Weaver.
Yeah, there it is, Matt. And again, we're out of Taylor's point of view. We don't see her processing through the things that she just did. We get a little hints of it from Theo and from Rachel, but we don't get to see it internally. But Theo does see something. Theo sees that almost sees when Taylor dons that mask, compartmentalizes and becomes Weaver again. She has processed the thing that she did. She shoved it away, and now she's donned Weaver again, and moved on. It's now back to the mission.
Yep. And they get right to it. They teleport into Los Angeles, and we experience all of this from Golem's point of view now, and we come to understand that Golem's power has a sensory aspect I don't think we were aware of. He's aware of all of the nearby surfaces that share the same material as the surface he's touching, so he can just kind of run his fingers along his fan or his skirt or whatever he has now, and he kind of gets a sense of what's around him.
Which, I mean, of course, makes complete and total sense, but never occurred to me before. Like, of course, how could he know what metals were nearby if he couldn't sense them? But yeah, that never occurred to me.
Yeah, and I like that. I mean, it's sort of, you wonder if he would have thought of a lot of these things if he hadn't been working with Taylor all this time, but he's very, that's perhaps a non-intuitive use of a power, but he basically is able to get a full sensory map of the whole area with a power that is fundamentally about making giant hands.
Yep.
So Dinah comes in on the comm and talks specifically to Golem and tells them to stop. She says everyone but Golem dies in 2 minutes if they don't stop. And she introduces a code, blue and red. Blue means back, right, retreat, solo. Red means forward, left, attack, team. All he needs to do is ask blue or red, and the context of what's going on will imply the meaning of what he needs to do.
Yeah, and she also, in this moment, says 31. And that means 31 more uses of her power. She's gotten such a good understanding of her power. She knows exactly how many questions she has left before her power stops working because it hurts her too much. And this becomes the structural element that guides us through all the action sequences of this next chapter and a half, this countdown of Dinah's questions. And I think it works really well as a way of controlling things through action beat to action beat. And we never get stale because we constantly see this countdown. We're constantly counting down. And there's this moment where you kind of realize, even when Theo is on his last leg, you get this feeling that he's not quite done yet because he's still got a handful of more questions. There's still 7 questions left. He's not out yet. It's a really cool way to structure the action sequence and make it fresh and interesting and tense. I like it a lot.
Yeah, and I think of this as being cinematic. I'm not sure why exactly, but I find it very easy to imagine, Golem running around and saying red or blue, and then, Dinah either answering or saying like, I don't know if I can burn a question on this one, and him saying, no, really, now.
Yeah,
it's so, there's such an urgency to it. There's such an urgency to every aspect of it. And like you said, it's a great way of framing the choices also, of saying sometimes in a complicated action scene, you're not sure what the character is considering. And here it's always, okay, red or blue. Am I gonna be aggressive? Am I gonna fall back a little bit? And it's framed like that repeatedly, and you get a sense of the ebb and flow of how things are going, how Theo's doing versus his opponents, how he feels about it. It's great. I love it.
Yeah, absolutely.
So now, just as they back up, Harbingers spill out from where they were about to be, wearing basically Halloween costumes with makeshift weapons, including what we can assume is an axe that is on fire.
Yes! Axe 2, Return of the Fire. That's funny. It's so funny because we've been doing this from the beginning, and it feels like sometimes things are made in response to things that we talked about, but of course they're not.
No.
Because that's impossible, but it always makes me laugh.
Yeah.
If we had episode titles on our episodes, I'd call this Arc 26 Part 2, Everything Scott Loves, comes back. Because we got fire axes, we got containment foam. Okay, there's child murder. That's a bad example.
Well,
let's just move on.
So the Harbingers close in and they easily evade all the attacks as they close the distance. Golem makes a platform hand and lifts everyone up into the air, but the Harbingers follow. They start systematically taking the heroes apart, ruining Tekton's armor and stabbing Chevalier in his good eye. We were reminded that the good guys don't really know Harbinger's power. They don't know that he's the number man, and even if they did, they wouldn't know what his power was anyway.
It's not even fair. It's power. It's not fair.
Yeah, this is dramatic irony again, because we've seen how ridiculous the number man is from the inside, and we're just like, nope, no way out of this. There's 8 of them.
Yeah.
So Golem realizes, as we do, that the Harbingers could end this even faster if they wanted to, but they're playing with the heroes. He launches as many people to safety as he can, but it only slows the Harbingers a bit.
Yeah, and it's just even in this moment, just like Jack and all his people are still just toying with them, just playing with them. It's like fuck.
Yeah, and that's emphasized by the fact that the Harbingers are like, oh yeah, don't kill Theo. We want to bring him to Jack.
Yeah.
So Scion is coming in. They get the message, and they agree that Weaver needs to go intercept him. Yeah.
I mean, it makes sense that Taylor's the one because she can fly and stuff, but I was a little like, oh, Taylor's going to talk to Scion? I don't know about this. I don't know if Taylor's in the best mental state right now to be chatting with the most powerful person on the planet.
Yeah, you're right. That does seem like a violation of quarantine.
Yeah.
So the numbers tell Golem that he needs to leave, that the numbers for his friends are actually better if he leaves. So he goes off on his own, and he starts using Dinah's power to narrow down where Jack is. Surprisingly, calling in the big guns at this point helps the numbers a lot, so they do that. And he says, Jack is southwest of my location, he reported, heading off solo on precog advisement. Scott, next time I want to leave a party early, I'm going to say, heading off solo on precog advisement.
Just parties? I'm going to use that constantly. I said it to my wife when I came in here to record the podcast. I mean, she didn't get it, but I definitely said it.
Yeah, well, she will.
Hopefully.
Yeah. So he vaults across the rooftops, using his power to sense and destroy traps, but he's eventually forced down to the ground where Psychosoma's monsters lurk. They run into a deadfall, and then he moves on.
Yeah, I know we talked about this already, but like his ability to sense materials and how freaking useful that is, like in a very similar way to how Taylor can kind of sense with her bugs. It's just so cool. It's so inventive. Like it makes perfect sense, but it's great.
Yeah, right. It reminds, we talked a lot about how the fact that Taylor can sense everything really helps us understand things as the readers, and this does the same thing actually.
Right. And we talked, I think, weeks and weeks ago about like how is Worm 2 going to achieve that same thing with a different power set in a way that's not just like, oh, well, this is another power solely because it has that ability. And I think this is a perfect example of it right here. Ability, you wouldn't even think about this power having that ability, but here it is.
Yeah. I like how we get the sense that Dinah has really come a long way in mastering her power, without having let that be told to us explicitly. She's able to sometimes get a sense of the paths and outcomes without necessarily burning a question on them. And she's also able to not ask a question, which is something she couldn't do before. Like if a question occurred to her, that was the same thing as asking the question. And now she can not ask it. Yeah.
Yeah. I like how like they're having a conversation back and forth, and it's like, she mentions how like there seem to be more paths that are positive and good. And Golem is like, that's good, right? And her response is, yeah, in a numbery way.
Yeah.
I just like that little beat.
Yeah, me too. So ultimately he finds Jack.
And then I think to connect back to the beginning of the chapter, as he faces him down, tears were forming in his eyes. Ridiculous. Wasn't supposed to be what happened in this kind of situation. And that's because he's Theo. Like, that's just who he is. And he can put on that mask, but he can't truly ever become that persona, that cold, calculating. At least it's not yet.
Yeah. And there's so much fear and anger bound up with this that it would be far too much to ask of oneself that you not be emotional when you come up against this person who's responsible for so much so much pain, you know?
Yeah.
So Jack continues his villain dialoguing, flexing his power at Golem, but Golem is stone-faced. This isn't a movie. Stop talking, Jack. You're not that clever, not as sharp as you like to think. You talk to me about keystones? Bullshit. You're a sad, pathetic killer with delusions of grandeur. Jack's smile dropped from his face. He held the claymore with one hand, the blade's point touching the ground, and spread his arms. His unbuttoned shirt parted, showing the whole of his bare shirt and stomach, showing himself to be vulnerable, exposed.
Oh, what a great beat. Like, that's something you and I have kind of been talking about since we met him, that there's this kind of hint that Jack thinks he's smarter and thinks he's more clever than he is, and he's not as sharp as he thinks. And I think that's a really excellent little play on words there from Theo. The guy with knives is not as sharp as he thinks. Very clever. And I think, like, in a few chapters, we're going to see, like, the actual explanation of this. And I just think it feels like we've been building to this since we met Jack. And I love, like, how much this contrasts with how Theo stood up to him back when a few years ago. He's still there's this core of Theo that's still there, the guy that stood up to Jack originally and stands up to him now, but he's just done with his shit. It's like, stop talking. And he repeats that a couple times throughout the fight as Jack, like, monologues as they're fighting. Stop talking, Jack. Like, he's just, I'm done with it. Let's do this.
Yeah, it's very satisfying. Yeah, it reminds me of the people like you I'd kill, sir.
Yeah.
So he begins fighting Jack, going by Dinah's cues, and he seems to be doing okay. At least nobody has the obvious upper hand for a while. But then Jack sees in the sky that Grey Boy has looped Scion.
Yeah. I wonder, did you, like, I really never for a moment, like, totally believed that this would be, like, Scion's done now because he's in a time bubble. It's over. No more Scion. But I did. Like, this is still a no shit moment, even if you don't believe that, because you realize that Scion is now, if he's not stuck forever, he's stuck for the moment, and he's going to be here. And that's when the wheel started turning that the catalyst we've been talking about is going to be our golden boy guy.
Yeah, I don't remember. I think there's so many, like, parallel threads of what could be happening going on that I don't think I ever settled into any particular one before we got to the moment of revealing what it was. Yeah, I don't think I had a firm guess as to what that would mean.
Yeah, but the way he says it, like, with Scion being trapped, he basically is done with Theo. He doesn't care about him. He thinks he's boring.
Yeah.
And he says, that, Jack pointed at Scion trapped in the sky, that interests me. And it's like, it's almost like makes your skin crawl a little bit, because you're like, oh shit, like this, like,
yeah.
It's really good. It's really good. It's a really good moment as you realize things are about to get way, way worse than just Theo losing this fight.
Yeah. And just think about how many different characters and how much, like, history of these characters we have in play over the last million words of build up toward this. It's amazing.
Yeah.
So yeah, like you said, Jack is done with fighting Theo, so he releases the Nyx gas from all the surrounding fake buildings, and then Jack, riding Hookwolf, and more of the Nine with him, emerge from the gas. Theo raised his hand as a shield even before Jack used his power in conjunction with Hookwolf's. A hand of pavement struck by 1,000 slashes in a matter of a second, whittled to nothing. Then he had only armor, and that too started to come apart. The cuts that followed parted flesh.
Oh, man, I was so mad when I finished this chapter, because I really thought Theo was just going to die here. I really did.
Yeah.
And it's because we kind of break trend here. Outside of Arc 17, where we were in one long interlude chapter from one point of view, we never really finish an interlude from a point of view and then stay in that interlude in the next. So I really thought in this moment we were ending this chapter, we were going to shift to someone else, and we were going to witness Theo dying from that other point of view. And I was like, no. And I think that's, and I think that's something that Wildbow was kind of conscious of. He leaves us on this cliffhanger here, knows that's kind of going to be the natural reaction to this, and uses it.
Yeah, I agree, and I also felt like Theo was a goner here. And in fact, I think he would have been if Jack hadn't intentionally sort of pulled back just as his power was about to finish him off, because
yeah,
it's like he just shreds away a giant hand of pavement and all of Theo's armor, and stops just after mutilating his body but not quite killing him.
Yep.
But we don't get to really find out about that quite yet, because we move on into 26.b, and Theo has gone back to his training, and it starts out he's in his foster home, I suppose, with Mr. Gale, his foster caretaker, offering him a ride to his co-op, his work, which he refuses. He heads out thinking about the Endbringer attacks, which now come far more frequently, every 2 months, and the growing sense among people that things are falling apart.
Yeah, and it says, beyond even the Endbringers, there seemed to be an unspoken acknowledgement that things were well beyond their control, that this thing with capes and parahumans wasn't going to turn out all right. And I think this is really fascinating, because it's this window into what it must feel like to live in a society on the verge of extinction. And I really like how much Wildbow captures this feeling. And it echoes this two types of people that Taylor mentioned a few arcs ago when she was trying to recruit people into the wards. That there's those that see the end of things as almost freeing, that they're like freed from the burden of everyday life and the worries of everyday life. And then there are those that exist and work hard only to stop it. But either way, this mask of normal life and normal concerns is kind of just ending.
Yeah. And again, that's a really interesting take on this whole idea of superheroes, because you never think about that at all in any of these superhero stories that we know and love. It's not like, okay, well, what does your corner, worker at the deli think about this whole superhero phenomenon? Do they think it's cool, or do they think it's utterly terrifying? And in this case, more toward the latter.
Yeah, the PRT existed almost to try to sell people on this and get people to be pro this. And I think we're seeing in this moment that has just failed. That there's too much destruction, there's too much death, there's too much fear to actually reliably keep that kind of PR up. Yeah,
that's right. So he meets Taylor at the HQ, and he tells her that he wants to do some sparring. She mentions that he might be better off sparring with the others, but he wants to spar with her. He values her as an opponent for her killer instinct.
Just compliment, I guess. You are dedicated to the point of cruelty, so only you can be the one to teach me.
Yeah.
So nice.
Yeah. She probably takes it as a compliment.
I'm sure she does.
Tecton comes up to talk to him as he puts on his costume, and it's about Weaver and how she keeps pushing people and how it always damages relationships. And she probably knows that she's doing it, but she doesn't care because the mission is more important.
Hey, Matt, that sounds like our girl.
Yep, sounds like Tecton has a good read on her.
Yep.
So Tecton asks him if he likes Taylor, and he says he does a little, but he knows it won't work out. It wouldn't work out. She's too hard to get along with.
And somewhere in Brockton Bay, Gru nods vigorously.
He admits that he likes Ava, Cuff, and Tecton encourages Theo to pursue things with her. Before he leaves, he arranges Theo to patrol with her.
Is it like... I love this. This comes right at the end of this beat where we observe Theo noting how the world is falling apart, how everything's on the brink of ending, how normal things don't seem to matter anymore. And then we have Tecton walk up to Theo, and what are his concerns? His concerns are, you've been hanging out with this person a lot. Why don't you? Who do you have a crush on?
Yeah.
And it seems so trivial, doesn't it? Like it's. I understand why he's doing it, and I get Tecton's reasoning, but like when you're in Theo's mindset that this is the end, that this is it, and like like you see that he kind of feels the triviality of it, and I think this goes in a roundabout way to show exactly why Theo does need Taylor, why he has to train with her and only her. Taylor is the only one who understands what he's going through, the only one who's as committed to this thing as he is. Tecton, as great as he is, and he's great, and he's hardworking, he is still looking at the things like relationships and friendships and team cohesion. to Theo and to Taylor, Jack and this end of the world is all that there is. There's no time for this other stuff. So that's why he goes with her.
Yeah, and when Golem says that to Tecton, when he says, well, she and I are the ones who take this the most seriously, Tecton is literally like, yeah. And it's not convincing at all. And Theo perceives that, and that's why he can't really, connect with Tecton that way.
Right. Isn't that interesting, though? I want to stop and talk about this for a bit, because Theo takes this thing so seriously because Theo was individually called out. Because Jack called out Theo and said, if you do not face me, if you do not train as hard as you can and try to kill me, I'm going to kill people. And it will be on you. 1,000 people on you. It is you. So it makes sense that Theo takes this thing so seriously. It makes sense that this is Theo's sole focus because he's been individually tasked with this responsibility. Taylor hasn't. No one's done this to Taylor. No one's forced Taylor into a situation where she has to be this committed. This is all just her. This is all her innate internal drive to be the person that has to fix this thing, that has to be the one. And I think that, we give Taylor a hard time, we worry about her, but there is something just truly heroic about that she, with no outside force or kind of threat, takes this whole thing upon herself, takes that world on her shoulders, just on her own. And that is heroic.
Yeah. That is her heroic nature. That's the core thing of this story is you have someone with an ultimately heroic nature who is put in a world where saving everyone requires terrible sacrifices, which is fairly realistic, actually.
Yeah.
So then he goes down to meet Weaver, and he blurts that he wants full contact sparring. You against me, a real match. She nodded. This has something to do with your talk with Tecton? Yeah, but not like you're thinking.
Yeah, and that goes back to that thing you just said, that talk only confirmed that Taylor's the only one that can train him, the only one that can help him get to a point where he needs to be at the end of these 2 years. The only one that can really, truly push him.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So they spar, and Weaver is obviously the superior fighter. Short of her refusal to deal permanent injury or kill him, she barred no holds, showed no mercy, offered little kindness, if any. There wasn't a thought to his morale, to the fact that she was systematically, methodically destroying the confidence he was building up. No, not heartless, not wholly inconsiderate. She tore him down because she trusted him to pull himself back together, to rebuild that lost confidence and redouble his efforts. So it's demoralizing, but he appreciates it. And on a level, he needs it.
Yeah, and isn't it kind of similar to how Jack operates? I mean, on a much more monstrous scale, but Jack wants to fight to tear someone down, to destroy them, to rip their confidence, to toy with them until they are broken. And it's in this training, Theo's almost preparing for that kind of fighting, because she's just dominating him completely.
That's right. Yeah. And he's seeking that kind of pressure because he thinks it was necessary. If she could just impart one useful lesson, it could make all the difference. Some technique, some of her ruthlessness, something, anything would do.
Yeah. And then that's such a great beat to end this little jaunt back in time, because suddenly we realize why we did it, why we jumped back in time to see this scene, because now we're in this moment where Theo is in this desperate situation, and the only thing he can do, the only way he can save himself is because of this training with Taylor.
Yeah, this indefatigability, this sort of ruthlessness and toughness. And here we may see him become Golem a little bit. So yeah, the cutting force of Hookwolf's blades grinds away his armor. Dinah tells him to retreat, and he does his best to retreat, but he's already too wounded. His wounds must be pretty horrific because he's been completely lacerated by, you just imagine Hookwolf except telekinetically projected everywhere. Oh, so he's in shock and bleeding terribly.
Yeah, I can't imagine. That's Jesus.
Yeah, right. It's hard for me to imagine what these wounds look like and still have them not be fatal. But there you have it. So Jack taunts him more and orders the 9 to finish him off. And then Dinah tells him to attack, which is such a wonderful moment, I think. Because you're like, oh, he's dead. The nine is like red, and there's that tactic again.
Oh, it's so good.
And
it's so good.
Yeah. So he crushes the supports of the nearby buildings, and this gives him an opening to get up and start getting away.
Yeah, I can't even believe he can move.
Yeah.
He's like almost blinded. He's stabbed. He's bleeding. And he's like, basically, the only way he's able to move is he's using his power. He like literally picks himself up by creating a fist to lift him. Yeah. And he's using them to walk almost. It's like, holy shit. He doesn't give up. He doesn't give up.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of, it's interesting. It says, it reminds Golem of sparring against Taylor. He hadn't won those fights either. And I think that's interesting because this reminds me of how Taylor fights, where if you were to view this, he's doing so many things in rapid succession. He's using so many different techniques and ideas that he must have come up with in the course of fighting Taylor. And again, this seems very visually stunning to imagine.
Yeah, and it's absolutely true in this moment that he hadn't won those fights. He didn't, but he hadn't given up either. Like he kept even as he lost all these fights, he never gave up, and that's what pushes him through in this moment. That he worked through all this and kept going, and he keeps going here.
Yeah. So yeah, he runs through the alley and he fights off a crowd of the nine. Then he makes a staircase of hands and ascends to the roof. He knocks down nearby buildings, being ruthless and aggressive, not able to care who else he might be hurting. Like Rabbi Bezalel's Golem, he's all about the mission.
Yeah, and we see now that's in the training sessions with Taylor. That's what she imparted to him. This ability to channel Taylor herself, the ability to kind of transition into her kind of mindset. And to confirm that this is what's happening, Theo crushes a mannequin with his hands and thinks, "Entomb," almost hearing Weaver's voice uttering the word. So he's doing a thing, and he can almost hear Weaver say it, almost can hear Weaver do it. So he's like, he's almost literally at this point just acting as an extension of her. And like it's scary on the one hand, but like it's kind of showing that this is what he needs in this moment. This is how he survives. Yeah.
They've trained so hard that he's absorbed these lessons, which is what he wanted, and it worked. That's what's great is that it worked. So Chuckles almost gets him. We haven't seen too much of Chuckles. Chuckles is pretty terrifying. But Golem crushes his nads before he can do anything more.
The Chicago Board's penis joke comes full circle.
Yes, it's because of Golem's experience manipulating penis-related hand power things that he was able to do this. So the murder rat almost gets him, and he thinks that he's a goner, but Weaver comes to the rescue. Parian then arrives and stitches him back together with telekinetic needle and thread.
And this fucking guy is a boss. He's like literally been ripped apart. He's somehow managed to fight his way to safety. And in this moment, they're like, "Golem, like you're done. You've done enough. Rest." And he's like, "No."
Yeah.
No.
He's like passing his body around between hands, and he's like, "No, I'm fine. Just props
just
himself
patch me up, boss, and I'm going back out there." Right. God, what a fucking beast.
I know. Love him. So they sneak up on Jack, again using the sensory aspect of his power, which is cool. Hoyden and Revel are conspicuously absent at this point. Are we supposed to conclude something from that? I mean,
I honestly didn't notice until you wrote that down, so I certainly hope not. Well, although I did predict that one of them would die. So.
Yeah, you predicted Revel would. I mean, the text actually says Hoyden and Revel were conspicuously absent. It uses that word.
I didn't. Interesting.
Well, I only really So I'm pretty sure we're supposed to assume the worst there. I don't recall exactly, but yeah, because we missed a lot of horrible fighting involving a bunch of harbingers. So who knows?
Yeah, that's true.
So Golem tells them that he's that Jack is like Weaver, that he has some other power, perhaps a thinker power. And Tattletale says that, as far as she can tell, this is true in some sense.
Yeah, and they're sneaking up on Jack. They're trying to figure out what to do, and they're all like, at this moment, they're all a fucking wreck. Like, we didn't talk about this, but Chevalier got like blinded in his good eye, and so now he can like barely see. And Golem is like stitched together with magical thread. Like, things are not going well.
Yeah. And as they're waiting, they're basically like, well, you know, we're in terrible shape, and there's Jack, and he's got all of the resources on his side right there. And Golem says, if we attack Jack right now, what's the chance of the world ending? 97% chance, but the alternative is worse, and it's getting worse every second. He barely had time to register the thought that this was it, the moment. Go, he said. So basically, there's a 3% chance of success, but they have to take it anyway.
Yep, 3%. And here we go. This is it. This is the final confrontation. We have 7 questions left at this point, and this is for everything.
Yep.
So let's do it.
So Hookwolf fights the heroes going after Foil, with the other heroes running interference, and she finally kills him with her rapier, penetrating his core. And Azazel lands nearby and disgorges a bunch more heroes: Cuff, Grace, Clockblocker, Kidwin, Vista. They realize that a group of the 9 in a nearby alleyway are not who they appear to be. They're disguised. They're actually Siberian Jack and Greyboy right there at a dangerously close distance. The heroes desperately try to hide and obscure Greyboy's vision. He can still use his power, though, without line of sight, and he just starts freezing chunks of space all around, and he catches Foil.
Oh, I was so devastated here. Not only because I didn't want anyone to die, but I picked the wrong lesbian.
Yeah. Yeah.
And like Parry and Scream, like this is, again, it's the rule of 3 here, right? So we see Foil scream, and then we repeat that beat twice more to really nail home she's been caught in a bubble. And then only after that third one, then we get Parry and Scream, and it's just so soul crushing. Like, I can imagine what it's like to witness that happen to a loved one. And God, it's so awful.
Yeah. Yeah. That was a moment where I was like, well, that's just mean.
Yeah.
You can't do that.
Yeah.
Which, of course, well, we'll get there. So Golem has an idea about what Jack's power could actually be. He asks Dinah if the idea that he's thinking of is right, and she says that it's a good shot. And it's a stupid, silly answer. He finds a certain individual in the crowd of heroes nearby, and he calls them to him. He stops the rest from coming. Only one person present will serve. He sends this individual the long way around behind Jack. And the individual, the Dragon's Tooth uniform, sprays Jack and Siberian with containment foam.
We're probably going to get flagged for that, and I'm going to have to lower the volume a lot. But worth it.
Yes, definitely worth it. And you're right, Scott. This chapter has completely vindicated you. So Tecton separates Siberian from Jack. Greyboy sees Jack's failure and immediately loops him in response, and then starts cutting into him. Then Foil, who was just pretending to be looped and using her enhanced sense of timing from her power to make her scream sound correct each time, steps out from behind the frozen barrier and kills both Greyboy and the Siberian projection with darts. They won, Scott. They got Jack.
Yes. What a great way to end this whole thing. What an unexpected, wonderful way. The foil setup is so great. You don't even see it coming. It's like the dragon's teeth person being the person, like, even outside of my love for containment foam, my vindication that it's the most powerful thing ever and everyone should use it. It's executed so well.
Yeah. And it's such a cool idea that this is all solved by a human, a non-powered person. It's just so fun. We don't even know this person's name, but they did it. Yeah. What are the numbers? Golem asked. Dinah, if you give me one more answer today. No response. And I remember that just making me physically ill at the time, because I was like, no, can't do this to me.
Yeah, there's this brief little moment of victory, and then we're followed by that. And like suddenly we realize that maybe that's the problem with relying on precog so much, Matt, that maybe the actions you take to try to prevent the thing that was predicted end up being the very things that cause the thing itself. And it's brilliant. It's so great.
Yeah. But turns out Tecton was close enough to hear Jack talking as he was being containment foamed. So they decide that Tecton will pick someone he trusts and run it by them.
And who does he pick, Matt? He picks Golem, because everyone trusts Golem, because Theo is the fucking man.
Yeah, I mean, I would tell Golem. I would tell him anything.
Me too.
Tecton leaned close. Doesn't make any sense. Nonsensical. He said.
And then it cuts off right there, because Wildbow is mean. But Matt, in this moment when he says it doesn't make any sense, nonsensical, in the back of your head, even if you don't quite remember it, you think of Golem's line from earlier in his first chapter, that stupid, nonsensical things were sometimes the most important. And that's when you go, oh shit.
Yeah.
Oh no.
One of many times that you're going to say that in the near future. Because what happens next is not something that you could possibly see coming. And I don't know if I can do this chapter justice, honestly. This is one of my favorite narrative moments of all time. This is the culmination of practically almost all of the mystery and foreshadowing and build-up in the story. And it comes at the climax of this fever pitch ramping up of conflict and tension to an impossible level where we feel like we may have resolved everything might be okay, and then suddenly the entity swims through the void and it remembers everything is stored dating back to the very beginning. And you're like, what? Oh. Uh-oh.
Yeah. This is... we've been doing this for over like 30 something episodes. We've been doing this for 8 months, and not once in this entire process have I felt more intimidated to cover a chapter than I do right now. As we said at the beginning of it, part of it is I don't know what to say first. There's so many things happening. Part of it is I don't know what to say, period. Like there's so many things, there's so many reveals, there's so much stuff, and it's like overwhelming. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to try to point out moments that I think best demonstrate Wildbow's skill as a writer. I'm going to try to put out moments that literally just like took my breath away. But I know that at the end of the day, in the 30 or so minutes we have left of recording this week, that we're just not going to do this chapter justice. So I'm just like, I guess I'm just trying to level set expectations here, because there's so much and we can't do it all.
Yeah. I mean, I think we talked about this for like 2 hours today.
We did.
So yeah, we'll get the highlights. You're getting the highlight reel, guys, when we'll talk about it more in the Reddit and elsewhere. That's how it's going to have to be. So it turns out that we're watching an alien species, some kind of worm thing with an ability to move between dimensions as easily as they move through space, struggles on their dying planet. The individuals fight for food and resources, but it's Malthusian. There's no victory. There's no thriving. It's a tangle. And this is the first arc name reference we get, although it's not the first name reference. That would be Worm, which precedes it.
Yeah, I think this is as good a place as any to point out how much fun Wildbow is having with wordplay throughout this chapter. I mean, not just bringing in every single arc name back to our attention, which is great on its own, but he uses worm a lot. He uses words like weave a lot, worm and weave and all these different things. And this chapter is such a culmination. Like, not only is it that last chapter before we truly move into the third arc of the story, but it's Wildbow getting to reveal things that he's probably been keeping secret from people for like 1 million words. And I just like get the feeling as this stuff plays out that he's having such a great time writing it. And that's why he's putting all these little word things, these little word plays in here, these little subtle references, not just in the obviousness of the arc titles, but otherwhere. He's having fun. And I think that really shows.
Yeah. And it's good to talk about that, because I think most people appreciate the narrative aspect of this, but the language aspect, I think, is just as cool.
Yeah, I agree.
So the creatures decide as a group that they will all die if the status quo continues. So they agree to consume all the matter and energy at hand and blow themselves out into space. They need conflict and variation, and they need resources.
Yeah, and another thing that we're going to try to do as we go through this is a lot of the stuff that happens throughout this arc. Not only is it explaining and we're learning the history of the passengers, the shards, and what they are and how they got here, but we're also kind of like, through them, we're kind of seeing the journey of the book so far, because we're seeing a lot of the themes that the book has touched on throughout the journey of this entity, and the conflict that defines its early lives, this pointless battle for resources, pointless squabbling over territory, over things. And that battling leaves everyone just a little bit weaker each time that it happens. And that sounds really familiar, doesn't it? That sounds a lot like the cops and robbers game that we saw amongst the capes, the heroes and the villains of our early capes, of our early book. Yeah,
absolutely. And it's all there. The parallels are all there. And I think we won't even get to talk about all the parallels that you could find here.
Yeah.
So the surviving entities after destroying the planet are conglomerations of shards, and they soar into space. It's a gestation. Some survive, arriving at planets with life. The entities distribute their shards with their abilities to the life forms on the planet. And we see that it borrows of the conflict and stress of this new alien species. It borrows of the evolution, of the learning, of the crisis. In some ways, it is a symbiote. In others, parasite.
Yeah, and so now this forced conflict, and again, like we've seen throughout the chapter, throughout the book, we've talked about this a few times, how it seems like these passengers, these shards, are kind of forcing conflict. Things keep escalating, like it feeds off of that conflict, and now suddenly it all makes sense. It all makes sense. They through conflict they learn. And
yeah.
So does Taylor.
Yeah, and if you'll recall that review of Worm that I wrote, like what feels like a million years ago, one of the things I said about it was that Worm is a superhero story, but it's also a great science fiction story. And ideas like this one, where you have this alien creature that is borrowing from the conflict and the evolution of a host species for its own learning, that is genuinely a science fiction concept that I have never seen anywhere else. And it's really cool. And I appreciate that a lot. And it's one of the things that elevates this from excellent superhero drama to really incredible work of literature for me.
Yeah. And it's like, the thing, I don't remember much of that review, but I remember your thing about how in most comic books, in most superhero stories, the people have powers because
yeah.
Like it just happens. Radioactive spider.
Yeah.
This is infinitely more complicated, infinitely more interesting, infinitely more thematically rich. It all ties together. Like the conflict, the fighting, the escalation, the bullying, all these things tie into the source of where this power comes from in such a fulfilling way. It's so good.
Yeah. So then the entity encounters another of its kind, and they share information. They winnow their own shards, mutate them, evolve them, using the knowledge they gain from the life forms. Then they consume all the energy from this planet, destroying it, and they move on.
Uh-oh.
Yep.
Uh-oh.
Beginning to see a pattern. Huh? So the next planet hosts sentient life, and the entities learn from the technology of this race. These are aliens which one imagines as being more like humans. They use the shards, the powers, for their own advancement. But then eventually they turn on the entities, and the entities learn the importance of obscuring their own nature. Ultimately, as always, they destroy this world too, and the pair of entities moves on.
So what you're saying is, like, containment foam, like, comes from a brilliantly advanced alien race from thousands upon thousands of years ago, and therefore is one of the greatest things ever invented.
Yeah, I mean, there's probably some alien race where that was like their main thing, was just everything was containment foam.
Well, I don't know. I don't know how successful that would be.
They probably called themselves the people of the Scott.
That's headcanoned. That's exactly what happened.
Yeah, I agree.
And now I hate the entities even more because they killed my people.
Yeah, they did. Yeah. You never know. You never know. So 3,000 cycles later, 3,000 worlds, thousands of sapient species driven to extinction, and this pair of entities have differentiated since then. They're not male and female, but their life cycle, it has caused there to be two roles, a thinker and a warrior.
Yeah, and we're about to in a few paragraphs to find out that the warrior is Scion. And I love that this kind of explains inherently why he's kind of like a dumb person because like he's not made to be the one that reasons and processes. He's the one that is fighty McGee guy.
Yeah.
He's not forethinking.
Yeah, right. And we see him strip himself down into something much smaller than he is at this point too. So they find a new world to test, and they pick a particular dimension to focus on, Earth Bet.
Can I just say that I'm so happy we have a sci-fi fantasy superhero type story with no kind of prophecy or chosen one or any of that nonsense. The reason the entities came to this Earth, was that it just seemed the best to sow conflict into. And like Earth Bet is not special. It's just really bad fucking luck.
Yeah. Yeah. It's only special in the sense that it's the worst available world where there were enough people to cause problems.
Yeah.
Pretty much.
Congratulations.
Yeah. And yeah, and it's a very bad thing that people have superpowers. It's not a happy thing.
Right.
So as the warrior strategizes, it notes that its counterpart appears distracted. The counterpart encounters another entity in space and shares shards with it, but the partner appears to sacrifice too much in the sharing, limping on but appearing to be distracted and suffering.
I was absolutely riveted at this point. I was like, something's going wrong. Something went wrong in the cycle. Things are changing. This is different from normal, which is always like the best part of stories take place where the thing that's happening is different from the way it normally does. That's like basic conflict and narrative structure, but it's good.
Yeah.
It's good.
Right. And it's the only kind of thing that gives you any kind of like crack of hope, because
you're
like, no, these things have been doing this for 3,000 cycles. They're just going to steamroll us. But no, if there's some crack of like, oh, something different this time, then yeah. So the warrior further iterates on its strategy, getting little feedback from its partner. It experiments with erasing the memory of the trigger event, and then it gives that memory erasing shard to a young female. It sees that there is more to learn from younger organisms in doing this. They're more prone to conflict and they're less stable.
Well, that explains all the teenagers.
Yep.
Here's one of the thousands questions I had during this whole thing. Are we supposed to know who this person is? They mentioned that they're like being around someone and on the verge of being like sexually assaulted or something. Like there's a guy pulling out his junk or something, and then the person disappears from sight. But I wasn't sure.
Well,
if we were supposed to know.
I think they don't disappear from sight so much as they make it so that the person can't remember that they exist.
So are we supposed to think that's imp?
I think
is that what we're supposed to think?
I think we are. I mean, it's ultimately it's kind of Easter eggy in the sense that it doesn't really matter whether you get that or not. Just like many things in this chapter, a few more that we'll talk about, I think. But I'm pretty sure it's supposed to be imp.
Okay.
So and also, remember when when we're in Imp's interlude, she thinks about how sometimes her power seems to be doing things that have nothing to do with hiding her. And I always like when I reread that, I was like, oh, yep, it's just going around erasing trigger event memories. That's what it's doing.
Huh. Yeah.
I mean, that was this is kind of all you have to go on. So that's what I assumed.
Yeah.
So as the warrior approaches Earth, it sheds almost all of itself, all but a tiny, tiny fraction. Its shards are seeded into the world. It will take 331 years before enough information has been gathered and the cycle can proceed. The warrior worries about the partner. Its ingress seems chaotic, uncontrolled. The counterpart is not worried.
Hey, there's that 300 years thing that the fairy lady was talking about. So at this point, my ages ago prediction, I made this a long time ago, that this was kind of a science experiment, is kind of right. I mean, not like I got the details wrong and stuff, but I'm surprised at how close I was to the actual thing. I mean, I didn't quite mean it the way I said it, but it's pretty close.
Yeah, I don't think you're the only one who's surprised by that, Scott. No, I think people are willing. I think, I've been following the spoilered comments ever since you said that. I think people have been willing to give you credit for that pretty much all along.
Okay. The thing that I do find interesting here is that the entity does not bring up Endbringers. At any point in this process, throughout the rest of this chapter, Scion, the warrior, does not bring up Endbringers. So they were not created by him. That's something I'm putting up in here.
Yeah.
I'm pointing to my brain for the people that are hearing on the audio.
Yeah, that is really interesting. I feel like I noticed that too, because I remember being like, oh, good, we're getting answers to all the mysteries, and having that thought of like, okay, we're going to get the explanation for the Endbringers. But oh. Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, the shards are assigned guidance on what hosts to pursue, but they're left to make up their own minds on the particulars. Physical harm renders a physical power, mental harm a mental one. Basically, it's just whatever serves the aim of insinuating the most conflict, maximizing the most learning.
Yeah, and this isn't new information for us. I think the people of Earthbed had reasoned this out a while ago, and we've known this information, but it just slots really nicely in here. It just fits. This puzzle piece fits perfectly in the overall image and just works here. And it's so it's so enjoyable.
Yeah, absolutely. So at the final stage, it checks the future for dangers one last time, and then it cripples that shard and sends it off to a small female.
And there's Dinah. So many things make sense now.
Yep.
That's Dinah with her crippled future shard. Explains why it works but doesn't fully work.
Right.
Explains the limitations. Explains why she can only do it a certain amount of times. It explains everything.
Yep. And it's such a ridiculously powerful shard by itself that you would you wouldn't trust that out in the world.
Yeah.
And it sends the last shard, the kind of a very important one. It cripples it and then sends it to a male thin in the company of strong males and females drinking.
So this is Taylor's shard. We will learn this in a few paragraphs. But that means that Scion originally gave that thing to Danny, not Taylor. That's who I'm guessing the thin male is. It's Danny. So Danny had the potential to trigger with this thing, I guess. But I guess the shard favored Taylor for tampon locker related reasons. And that makes me wonder, like, how, like, by chance, like by horrible event, it's all Emma's fault.
Yeah. Yeah, no, totally. Yeah. And another thing about that is we know that master triggers tend to occur in people who are isolated. And even in this very scene of peeking in on Danny, he's in the company of people, and they're drinking with him. They're trying to cheer him up.
So yeah, he's not alone. You're right. You're right.
Yep. Nobody's cheering up Taylor.
Nope.
Finally, the entity takes on its adult state, imago. A body no more than a tendril of its former self is created. It waits, but receives no transmission from the counterpart. Dead shards fall from the sky, and it waits, but eventually concludes that the counterpart is dead. In seeking to understand the host creatures, the entity had coded shards to emulate them. It is those same shards that experience the entity's first ever emotion. Crushed.
So, how often do we talk about... We just had a whole conversation about Dragon and the emulation of human traits, and if that emulation is so accurate, does it not just become a human trait? So he's emulating emotions here, but he's feeling them, and I think this is ironically the thing that leads to Scion's decision at the end of this whole thing, that the little bit of humanity, simulated or not, in him frustrates him, angers him, and leads him towards deciding what he does.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting that the entity almost dismissively thinks about the emotions that it's feeling as it's just a simulation. It's just a simulation. Yeah. But these are the things that drive so much of its behavior.
Right, right.
Yeah, so the warrior's human component is found by people, and it sees a shard failing to attach to a host on the ship, and so it repairs the man's cancer so that its own cancer can take root.
Yeah, and this is now we finally confirmed that the entity, the warrior, is Scion, the source of all the shards of the passengers, and that's my speculation confirmed. Nailed it.
Yep.
And I actually went back to the very first interlude to read it again, because we of course have seen this scene play out from the television and in Danny's first interlude, and we see that man cured from cancer just by being around Scion. And I remember not only does everyone else, but you at the time think this is some sort of god, and he can cure cancer like just by being in his presence. And wow, he's saving people just by being around them. And now we see this from the other angle, that Scion wasn't saving this person. He just was making it so his experiment worked better.
Yeah.
And this is like the final illusion of Scion being this benevolent force. Like, we've slowly been chipping away at this throughout the book, the more we learn about him. And this is like the final chink for me, that this defining moment of who Scion was in the first moment we see him in the book is now just gone.
Yeah, definitely. It's very important, I think, that we went back and addressed that exact moment, because it does call back to, like you said, the first time that we hear about him, and recontextualizes that into I can't even really say an evil motivation. I mean, it is evil, I suppose, but that's imposing human morality on something that is so distant from humanity.
Right.
I mean, that's another thing. That's another science fiction thing that I really appreciate, is these are really alien aliens,
right,
in terms of being just difficult to comprehend what it is like to be them. And it makes little sense to try to impute some concept of good and evil onto them, because they're just survival machines who have a really strange life cycle, really.
Yeah. Yeah. The existence of like bipedal creatures on a planet that live for 80 years or so it doesn't even register. Like, it's totally meaningless to them.
Right. Yeah. And now it's the present. A young female with his administrator shard approaches the last shard that he distributed, and she tries to stop him. It's the queen.
And it's Taylor. And I think it's like, I like that it's called, like, I've called her Queen Bee a few times throughout this story, just because it seemed to fit, like, as she controlled and all this stuff. And now we've had Glastic call her Queen Administrator. We had, I think Jack even called her the would-be queen, which she interpreted as something from Cherish. But now we got it here. It's confirmed. Taylor is that queen shard, and we understand why she's so powerful, because she was one of those core shards that was intentionally damaged because its true power would have been so ridiculous. So it makes sense here. And I wonder, it makes you wonder, if this thing is damaged, is intentionally weakened, what could she do with it if it wasn't? And that gets me speculating.
Yeah, I don't know, Scott. I mean, I don't know. So, So Taylor says, I know you want to help, but it's too dangerous. You're too strong, and the situation is fragile. It'll do more harm than good. More harm than good. Scion accepted that as a given and decided to stay where he was. And I love that so much. I mean, it calls back to what you just said about this being the last bit of eradicating any hope that he's a good guy, because he's just like, oh yeah, of course, more harm than good. I'm here to kill all of you.
Yeah.
So in the past, again, we're flipping back and forth through time, of course. Kevin Norton approaches the Golden Man and berates him for having the gall to be both sad and useless. Norton tells him to be useful. The warrior accepts this. It's at least a role he can play.
Yeah, and how similar is that to Taylor's journey? How throughout her journey, she's been looking for purpose, looking for a role, and she finds it, and she attaches herself to different things. It was taking down the Undersiders to join the heroes, then it was saving Dinah, and then it was taking down Echidna, and then it became Jack and the end of the world, and she's been latching on to a role. And that's what Scion does here. Is his experiment has failed. The other half of him is dead. He has no purpose anymore. And someone offers him a purpose. An outside force offers him a purpose, and he latches onto it. And that's so much of what we see our main character do.
Yeah, and it's somehow in line with both his nature as this, crystal thing, and his nature as a human who's just sad and demoralized. It serves a function for both of those aspects of himself.
Yep.
So back in the present, the warrior observes the fight. The broadcast shard manipulates and interacts with everything around it, which we recognize the broadcast shard is actually Jack's, and it's manifested in a very interesting way.
Yeah.
Then the warrior's trapped.
Yeah, we see Jack's hidden power here, that thing that's been hinted at for so long, kind of like a thinker power, but kind of not. And it's the broadcast shard, the one that allowed it to communicate with its other half. So Jack's power kind of itself allows it to communicate with other people's shards. And now we understand why really the PRT member, the dragon's tooth, the dragon guy, was able to sneak up on it because he didn't have any powers. He didn't have a shard. Jack could not detect him. Jack could not see him. And I think Jack has gotten so used to this sixth sense that he had. And they say maybe he wasn't even conscious that he had this. He just kind of had it, that he doesn't use his eyes. And he's so reliant on that sixth sense. It's just a good way to go in and explain exactly how this worked out, why it worked out this way. It's really good.
Yeah, it just stitches everything together. So in the past, again, the warrior saves people from a burning building, and one of the people asks his name, and the warrior considers. And I love this. The promised land could be this world at its climax, the shards at critical mass, the entity and its counterpart bringing about the end of the cycle. It could be utopia, as the entity understood the term. It could be the world at peace, people saved from hardship, as Kevin Norton had described it. Whether the entity was somehow able to return to its original task, or whether it continued carrying out Kevin Norton's answers in an attempt to find itself, the term fit. Zion, it spoke.
Yeah, the world to come, Eden, it makes sense. Like this utopia, this Eden that Zion and his counterpart, like, were going to achieve by ending the world, by killing everyone. It's like, at this point of everyone's going to be full power and happy together, and then you're all going to die. And that is Zion. That is the promised land.
Yeah.
Like, what?
Yeah, that's what's so wonderfully alien about it, is he considers like a world at harmony and a world completely destroyed to be equivalent things, basically,
right?
Because they both appeal to different aspects of what he's potentially could be. So it observes the battle some more, watches Grey Boy's dead shard, sees so many powerful shards present, ripe with conflict. I love that phrase. It sees Contessa appear, and the Number Man also. They subdue all 8 harbingers without much trouble, and then they bring the survivors with them.
Oh, good. That's great. They got a bunch of Numbermans.
Yep.
Goody. But so we see here that the dead shards are described are all Cauldron Capes, Grey Boy, Numberman. So that kind of confirms this idea that I had that Cauldron, and I'm spoiling my speculation here, but Cauldron is the one that found the counterpart, the other entity, and has used its dead shards and captured them into the formula somehow. But the interesting part about this one is Contessa's shard is not described as dead. It says very specifically that hers is a shard that does not belong to her, but is not dead. That's interesting, and I haven't quite worked my way through that, but that's a very specific thing we point out here.
Yeah, that is really interesting. It also observes this ancient weapon, Sting, this way of penetrating things in all dimensions, which kills Grey Boy and pops the Siberian. Once it had been a weapon for his kind against this kind back in the beginning, when they had dwelt in oceans of grey sludge. Against
his kind, Matt. So for those of you scoring at home, Foil just possibly became the most important cape ever, ever in this coming war. And that's not something I saw coming at all.
Yeah, I love this here because it reminds me of like a shark, where you have like a shark is this perfect killing machine that's remained evolutionarily unchanged for hundreds of millions of years because it's so perfect. Yeah. And while all these shards have been refining themselves and evolving and iterating over time, over thousands and thousands of worlds, this sting shard is the same weapon from back in the day, because it's the shark. That's how I think of it. So we hear more of what Tecton tells Golem, but I'm going to save Jack's speech for a minute because I just kind of want to have it all in one spot. So we skip over to Tattletale, and it looks like they've gone. They defeated Jack. Everything's fine. So she sends everybody home. People relax. Charlotte brings Aiden over and tells Tattletale that he triggered. He controls birds now.
Yeah, and that's one of the things we didn't touch on, but we had learned earlier that Taylor's shard had fragmented and split off and gone into someone else. And here it is. I think it's pretty explicit here that we have an innate and a slight variation on her power, controlling birds instead of bugs. But Taylor has a little shard baby.
Aww. So Charlotte asks about a drawing that she showed to Tattletale that Aiden had made, but Tattletale doesn't remember it. Charlotte insists and finds it for her and shows it to her. And eventually, after some back and forth, Tattletale finally really looks at the picture, with Aiden explaining what it is. And this is enough for her power to finally build around the mental block. And she remembers, like viruses, like gods, like children. Like viruses infecting a cell, converting it into more viruses, bursting forth to infect again. Like gods, so much power, all gathered together. All powers stem from them. Like children, innocence, blank slate.
And she figures it out. In this moment, she figures it out. And all she can say, all any of us can say, is "oh balls."
Oh balls.
Oh balls.
Yeah, that reminds me. This is the most wonderful. This whole arc actually is wonderful on the audiobook, and this chapter in particular has a lot of line reads that I think are fantastic, and "oh balls" is one of them. Saint.
Awesome.
So at this point, Saint, we skip over to Saint, who's watching over everything, finally relaxing a bit when Tattletale bulldozes through the security systems to talk to him. She unfortunately can't answer the question, which has to do with the 10x10 game that Defiant and Dragon used to play together. They realize that Cyan can hear Jack, so Saint contacts Defiant to try to ask for help.
So the story allows you to figure out that Cyan is the one that Jack talks to kind of before the characters do. So we kind of see this. And yet, this whole little part here is filled with so much tension. There's frantic scrambling. Saint reaches out to Defiant for help. Defiant. These two guys fucking hate each other. But in this desperation, they reach out together and work together in this desperate attempt, this final last-ditch effort. We have to stop it. We have to stop it now. Oh, it's so good.
Yeah, you can sense the desperation. It's incredible. So they succeed to the extent that they find Lisette and they broadcast a message to her over loudspeakers, from her over loudspeakers, hoping that she can counter what Jack is saying, that she can convince Cyan of something different. She tells him not to listen and to leave, and the entity does. It flies around the world and it contemplates what the broadcaster said.
That was close. I mean, oh fuck.
Yeah. And I'm going to read the whole Jack speech in one go, because the way it's delivered in the chapter is wonderful, because it's spread out in a way where you're gradually more and more understanding what's going on, and gradually more and more understanding what's about to happen. But because we already understand that, I just want to say it all at once so that we can analyze it. So what he says is, "Just you and me. I wish I had better company, but I'll take what I can get. Ironic that you're so boring. I bet you think you're noble. You're not. You're uglier than any of us, Sparky. I always hated the blank slates. Never that interesting. Never created art. Never created variation. You're worse than most. I'm not Darwinist. None of that bullshit. I think it's simpler. Us monsters and psychopaths, we gravitate toward predation because we were originally predators, originally had to hunt, had to be brutal, cruel, in order to survive. Violence was what made us or broke us back in the beginning. What I don't understand is why a blank slate like you would default to doing good deeds, rescuing cats from trees. Why not turn to that violence, as our ancestors did? It drove them, just like it drives the basest and most monstrous of our kind. In hearing this, the warrior concludes that it would have come to these conclusions eventually anyway. Doing good deeds has done nothing for the entity. And it goes and it thinks to itself, seeking out alternatives wasn't even in the realm of imagination, because imagination was something it lacked. It had power, though, and if either the counterpart or the cycle had been intact, they could have filled in for that imagination. Still, it could experiment. It gathered its power, then aimed at the nearest, largest population center, Kevin Norton's birthplace. The entity did not eliminate the smoke or the waves that followed. It simply let the aftermath occur. The simulated human mind within the entity felt a glimmer of something at that. Pleasure, relief, satisfaction. Something deeper inside, something primal, tied to memories back in the beginning, before the beginning, responded in a very similar fashion. The entity extended its perceptions outward, felt the reaction, the outcry. It turned words around in its head, as if it were broadcasting to itself. Scourge, extermination, extinction. That last one was the one to fit. In this, it almost felt like it was evolving as an individual, moment to moment. The entity opened fire once again, and this time it struck out at the coastline on the opposite side of the ocean. So I think that's the longest stretch I've read of anything in this book so far, but...
Yeah, but I couldn't interrupt you in that. I couldn't.
It's just so powerful to me.
Yeah. It is, like, every part of it, and it's such, like, from Jack's speech echoing back to the first thing we saw him say. The first time we saw him, he talked about the blank slate, about tabula rasa, and how much he hated it, and that's why he didn't like Oni Lee, right? That's why he rejected Oni Lee, because it was boring. So everything ties back. So his point of view makes sense. His, like, reasoning has a certain fucked up, horrible logic to it. And so does Scion's in a way, because, like, this idea that, like, go back to the beginning, back when we were just cruel things trying to survive. We've seen that was the start for the entities too. These all powerful, all knowing things were at some point just creatures killing each other just to survive. And that makes sense to it on a primal level. It even points that out, the primal satisfaction it feels from going back to its violent origin.
Yeah. And this primal satisfaction that a creature feels on exerting its power through violence on other beings. We have a name for that in the schoolyard.
What is it? What is it, Matt?
It rhymes with smullying.
I can't guess it.
Okay.
I can't guess it. No, You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. That comes back to it. Like, Scion has just become the world's biggest bully, and it's like everything coming together in this wonderful moment, this wonderful end. We've this game-changing end of the arc, this game-changing end of this part of the story. We're moving into the end. We're setting all this up, and it's so satisfying.
Yeah. So that's that arc. That's
that.
One of my favorite. I mean, it's weird because the first time you read it, you're feeling so many things, and I've read this so many times, and I've like been appreciating it for so long that I'm almost overly like academic about it, but I'm still capable of feeling all the same feelings again, and I think that's the sign of really good writing, that the feelings don't attenuate over time.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think you're absolutely right. That this, I mean, I obviously did not have that experience, but I can see myself reading this again in a year, in 2 years, and still feeling like I did this first read through, which was like floored with every word, like riveted to the page. I don't think I tweeted too much during this one when I was doing my live tweet, because I was just in it.
Yeah.
And like, I didn't want to tear my eyes away from the screen to construct a funny tweet. I just didn't want to do it.
Yeah.
Because I'm just here.
Yeah. Well, and it's a very different kind of chapter than we're used to. It's a lot of information in a very, very unusual perspective. So we wanted, before we completely wrap up, we wanted to talk a little bit about some comparisons between different takes on the, godlike savior superhero archetype. And I had kind of just thrown out to Scott earlier, like, hey, it's interesting to contrast this character with Superman and with Dr. Manhattan. So Scott, why don't you open up that can of worms?
You want me to talk about Superman?
Talk about Superman, Scott.
I think we talked about this way back near the beginning. But Superman as an all-powerful entity is almost entirely defined by Clark Kent, by the upbringing he had with his parents. His moral compass, his morality, his sense of right and wrong was created not as an all-powerful god, but as a kid living on a small farm in middle America. So this is core to him. He has a level of humanity and a level of morality that is extremely different from someone else. And I think you even said that depending on the lore of Superman that you're going off of, most Kryptonians are seen as bad, are seen as violent and like ruling gods that are cruel because they don't understand. They're more like Scion, but Superman is unique in his humanity, and that's very different from Scion, who has a touch of humanity, just like the emotion of it, the thing, like the most kind of primal version of it, but not enough humanity to develop the moral side of humanity, to understand that right and wrong difference. And so it's like he got all the bad parts about being a human being and none of the good ones. Yeah,
it seems like it. And I think Dr. Manhattan is another take on this, where he's, I suppose, somewhere between the two, or a different spin on it, where he was just a normal human, but he was given this godlike power, and the longer he existed with that godlike power, the less human he became, and the less he was able to relate to humans. And ultimately, he just I think, ceases to be human, more or less, and just stops caring about human concerns altogether. So I think these are interesting, different perspectives on potential paths of having ultimate power like this.
Yeah, and Dr. Manhattan is really interesting to me because, Watchmen itself exists as a deconstruction of all these things. So Dr. Manhattan serves as if someone were like Superman, even if they had a human sense of morality, a human sense of right and wrong, they would eventually get to this point where they lose touch with that because their power is so great. But you also have to reckon with the fact that Dr. Manhattan earned his powers so late. Like, Superman learned his moral code while having a certain amount of his power, where Dr. Manhattan existed as a person and then became this powerful thing, and almost only seemed to like increase in power from there. So while I understand they're common on each other, it is a little different. And Scion, you're right, I think kind of is the far end of the spectrum, where the level of humanity it has is so minute, so simulated, as it were, that it doesn't even operate on our black and white, right or wrong moral spectrum.
Yeah, and I think one final thing about Dr. Manhattan that comes to mind is it's not even so much the godlike power as the fact that he perceives all time and space to be simultaneous, which is like would be so destructive to your sense of yourself as a human being. So that's completely aside from the fact that he can do anything he wants with manipulating matter.
And if I recall, like, he's not like, he's trying to hold on to his humanity, but it's just such a smaller part of the larger whole that like he's not like intentionally doing. He's not like greedily saying like humans are stupid, blah blah blah. It's just like it's slipping away because it's such an insignificant thing as compared to the scope of him as at large, which I think is very similar to Scion.
Yeah, I think you're right. Yeah. Okay, I think that's good. Let's move on from talking about the arc to a little tiny bit of name game. So we had mentioned that we actually forgot a name that we wanted to talk about, and it's kind of funny that we forgot this one. So it's just this one this week, and that name is Nice Guy. So
what significance does that have in the story, Matt?
Yeah, so we've mentioned a number of characters in this story: Cody, Kraus, Greg, probably some others that are not at the tip of my tongue, who fit into this archetype that is called the nice guy, which I think we've explained before. Basically, it's almost a sarcastic use of a nice guy. It's a guy whose niceness is almost like a facade or a shield that he puts up to hide his underlying insecurity and desperation.
Yeah.
In this case, nice guy is a villain whose power is somewhat like Imp's in that it's impossible to perceive him as a threat, which is pretty much what the nice guy archetype is about.
Yep, it's like a literal manifestation of that archetype. It's really great. Yeah. That's all.
Yeah, that's it.
Just wanted to talk about that. Yeah.
All right, Scott, my favorite part. Let's do some speculations.
All right, Matt, we have a ton of old ones to close up here because it turns out that this arc was filled with a lot of information granting. So first, number 1, I said that Cauldron not only knows about the passengers, but they created them. Well, that's wrong. That was the entities. That was Scion. So wrong me.
Okay.
I also said the end of the world will be caused by Jack waking up the passengers early. That was when I was trying to tie into my science experiment thing that they were actually asleep and they were going to wake up at some point. No, that's not. That was wrong. I kind of changed my mind about that one like months ago, but I really couldn't do anything about it until it was proven wrong.
Yeah, fair enough.
I said Jack / will mess with Lisette, will convince Lisette, who will order Scion to destroy end the world. Close, but not quite.
Yeah,
not quite.
People really like that prediction though, because it's a pretty clever idea, even though that's not what happens.
Yeah,
it's connecting a lot of the right dots because Lisette is involved. She's in the scene, you know.
Yeah. But not enough for me to give it to me.
Yeah.
So this next one is my long one where I said the passengers or the things that make them are performing a 300-year science experiment. They seed our planet with the potential for trigger events and observe and report as we destroy ourselves. If not enough people are triggering, they send down Endbringers who attack separate locations and cause enough devastation to induce triggering. But don't rampage and destroy the world outright. How Scion and Cauldron fits into all this? I don't know yet. I know part of that now. So yeah, again, I got details of this wrong. I got the Endbringers part wrong because, as I said, we did not specify the Endbringers were not mentioned in this chapter at all. So that part is wrong. But I think I'm close enough, man. I'm close enough.
Yeah, I would say we can tentatively give it to you, and we can review. I think there've been a few where we've been like, yeah, we'll give it to you for now, and then when everything's all over, we'll see if all the details really fall in line the way you think they do.
Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah, I'm pretty confident giving it to you for now. Yeah.
All right. Number 5, I said Scion is a passenger, the passenger. Yeah, correct. I mean, he's one of 2, but it counts.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting because the fandom uses the word shard like exclusively, pretty much.
Yeah.
It's actually been impressive to me that people are able to consistently use passenger in our Reddit threads because they only ever use shard elsewhere. But it's because passenger is a word that makes more sense if you're thinking about it as being something that pertains to humans, but really it's the humans are the incidental part as far as the entities are concerned.
Yeah. Okay. I will shift over to using shard from now on. Though. I will do that.
Okay. Well, either way.
All right, and lastly, I made a whole bunch of death predictions last week. I said at least one of the dragon's teeth, Revel, Parian, and Golem. And as far as we know, I literally got 0 of these correct. Yeah. We don't know what happened to Revel necessarily, but we did not see Revel die. And I kind of meant in this battle, in this pursuing thing. Wow, I read that. read that really wrong.
Well, yeah, that's okay. I mean,
things did not unfold the way I thought they were going to, obviously.
I mean, that's the problem with conjunctively complicated predictions where you have to predict A, B, C, and D. It becomes less and less likely the more clauses you add, but
that's true. Yeah. But I wanted to go big. People asked me to go big, so I did it.
We appreciate it.
So yeah, my new ones, the one I kind of hinted at already, my guess is that Cauldron or Dr. Mother herself, prior to founding Cauldron, discovered Scion's counterpart, the dead entity, and used its corpse to engineer the vials seen in all the Cauldron capes. The shards remaining on it or what have you. So that's number one. Number two, this is pretty heavily, I mean, it's not totally heavily hinted at, but we get this, we have Scion, this seemingly unkillable, all-powerful being. We know they can die because we've seen its counterpart die. And we know that there's this weapon, this ancient weapon that they used to kill each other, and we know that one of our capes has it. So I'm going to say that Foil Flechette is going to kill Scion at the end of this thing. That she will strike the blow that kills Scion. So that's number two.
All right. Awesome. Good stuff, as always. And that will wrap up our coverage of Arc 26 Sting. I hope everyone enjoyed our discussion and hearing Scott's reactions. As always, we appreciate your feedback, and we're always trying to improve. So let us know if you have any advice, questions, or thoughts on this week's episode.
Yeah, you can reach us via email at gotwormpod@gmail.com or on Twitter at gotwormpod. There's 280 characters now, so your angry tweets at me can be extra long. My personal Twitter is at ScottDale85, and Matt's is more falafel.
Yep. More than Emil Statham this week. If you're not already subscribed, We've Got Worm. We strongly recommend you do so and never miss an episode. You can find us on iTunes, Stitcher, YouTube, Google Play, and pretty much anywhere else in the world that you can listen to podcasts.
And as always, you can find this, all the other podcasts we do, and all of our writing, essays, film and TV criticism, and more at dailyplanetfilms.com. This week on the Daily Planet podcast, Matt and I watched Thor Ragnarok and discussed how much we enjoyed it. You can see this and all the other podcast shows we do over on that feed. Go check them out. Also, another friendly reminder that our Daily Planet book club for this month is meeting this Friday, November 10th at 9:30 Central Time. We're talking about Carrie. It's a short book, so if you haven't started it somehow, there's still time. I read it in one setting the first time I read it for this, so it's possible. Still time to read it and join us.
Yeah, and it's really good. As someone who had never read it before, it is surprisingly good, actually.
It is very good.
So yeah, if you like any of those shows and you want to support them, we have a Patreon page, patreon.com/dailyplanetfilms. Consider donating $1 a month or whatever else you can afford. Special thanks to new Planeteers Tobias, Tassia, and Joshua, all at the $1 level. And Captain's Planet, Bobby, and Quarter at the $10 level. You know, I think we got a bunch more people just before this podcast dropped.
We got 5 or 6 new people right before we did the recording, and we hadn't put them into the script yet. We'll do all of them next week.
Yes, we will hit you.
We're going to get you guys.
That's right. We'll hit you up next week.
Yeah.
Also, speaking of Patreon, make sure you stop by our Wildbow's page and toss some money there, because he's the guy that makes this whole thing possible.
Yeah. Thank you guys so much for all the support. It's incredible to see it. I'm so thrilled that you guys are liking what we do here. And this Matt is normally the part of the podcast where I say something funny and clever and then go to iTunes and read one of our reviews by our listeners. But guess what? As I warned you all last week, we don't have any new ones. So this is the part where I sit here awkwardly and beg you guys to hop on over to iTunes and rate and review us. Please do it. It really does help. I really like reading all the nice things you guys say, and it does. The more reviews we have, the more the podcast get noticed on iTunes and all the other feeds. And that brings more people to it, which could bring more people to Worm, which is always good because this book is awesome.
That's right. And that's it for us this week. Next week, we'll be covering Arc 27, Extinction. Scott, any guesses as to what's going to happen?
Seriously? What will happen in the arc called Extinction? I'm just going to need to use all my brain for this one.
Okay, well,